Microphones are now live.
I didn't think it was 6 yet.
Yeah, ready.
All right, it is 6 o'clock, so I will now call the meeting to order of the Cotati City Council. All right, could we please begin with a roll call?
Councilmember Rivers,
Here.
Councilmember Lemus,
Here.
Councilmember Harvey,
Here.
Vice Mayor Ford,
Here.
Mayor Sparks.
Here. Thank you. At this time, I'd invite folks to join us in standing for the land acknowledgement if you'd like to. The city of Cotati recognizes that we are on the ancestral lands of the coastal Miwok, who are the original caretakers of this area. We respectfully acknowledge the indigenous peoples who have been stewarding and maintaining a relationship on this land as knowledge keepers for millennia. This acknowledgement does not take the place of authentic relationships with indigenous communities, but serves as a gesture of respect to the land we are on. And now please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. The first item on our agenda tonight is the approval of the minutes from our regular meeting of April 9th. Were there any corrections or changes to the minutes? Yeah.
Just one correction. In item 12A, the opening sentence as recorded in the minutes still doesn't make sense. Editing section 2.1 to read, and what in the minutes is general fund, 25% of annual expenditures will be held general fund operations. And so I'm sure that's not what ended up in your final draft, so can we just change the minute to say clarifying section 2.1?
So striking, just so I understand, striking that whole
The specific language. there.
language and just say clarifying section.
It even just fits under minor typo corrections, I think, which is later in the minutes. We could
Okay.
just strike the whole item if that's all right. Did you catch that, Kevin? Okay.
All right, any other changes to the minutes? Is there anyone who would like to make a public comment about the minutes from our last meeting? Okay, and do we have any Zoom attendees?
Yes, we do. Thank you, Mayor Sparks. Speaking to our Zoom attendees, if you would like to make a public comment on approval of the minutes, please use the raise hand icon. Mayor Sparks, that'll end public comment.
Okay, thank you. I'm looking for a motion to approve the minutes.
Move to approve the minutes
As amended?
as amended.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion to approve the minutes passes unanimously. I will read some announcements now. Meeting orientation for new attendees and viewers. In conformance with the Brown Act and the adopted City Council rules, the meeting agenda includes items labeled as action items where the City Council may consider the item. If the City Council considers the item, citizens will be afforded the opportunity to provide comments relative to the item being discussed. The meeting agenda also includes a citizens' business item, which is the designated place on the agenda where citizens have the right to say whatever they wish. However, the Brown Act prohibits the City Council from taking action or considering any item that is not on this agenda. To ensure that other members of the community who wish to provide comment are notified in advance through a properly noticed meeting agenda. Measure S supports police services, a variety of recreation programs for all ages, and the maintenance of our streets, parks, and public buildings. See details on the web at cotaticity.org. Citizens interested in receiving City of Cotati community alerts via text or email are encouraged to sign up with Civic Ready by signing up on the city's website, www.cotaticity.org, under the How Do I link at the top of the homepage. Like always, we love to hear from you, so please feel free to contact the city at 707-792-4600 or info@cotaticity.org. If you have a non-emergency issue after normal business hours, you can contact us at 707-792-4611. And of course, if you have an emergency, please contact 911. Continue to look for updates on the city's website and social media channels available on Facebook, Instagram, and Civic Ready. So our next item is a presentation from the Sonoma County Libraries. I'd like to invite you to come up. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Mayor Sparks, council members, and City Manager Obid. I'm Erica Tebow, and I'm your Library Director for Sonoma County Library. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Roanoke Park Cotati Library specifically, and then our library system in general, and share with you some of our successes over the past year. Next slide, please. So last summer, we conducted a community survey to assess how the people of Sonoma County felt about their library system, and the results were overwhelmingly positive. The main things that patrons and residents responded to are qualified librarians and keeping qualified library staff, reading programs for children, including summer reading, homework help, career support, and computer labs, safe places for children after school, and clean and well-maintained buildings. Next slide, please. So in 2021, we completed our new strategic plan. We call it our Reimagining Plan. And this guides us in our decision making and helps us set our priorities in terms of the programs we provide, as well as our facilities and how they're funded. We're making steady progress towards our goals, and the three main areas of our Reimagining Plan are organized into key themes that include providing opportunities for all to contribute, interact, and participate, furthering community resiliency, and fostering racial equity, social justice, and inclusion for everyone. Next slide, please. So your library system was formed into a joint powers agreement among the county and all 9 cities in Sonoma. A countywide system allows us to provide over 500,000 books, hundreds of digital resources, a comprehensive interlibrary lending system, a mobile library van, and much more. We can provide economies of scale in our operations, and by partnering with you, we offer more expansive library services than you could provide if you ran your library as a city department. We have 15 locations that span the county, from Cloverdale in the north to Petaluma in the south, Guerneville, Sebastopol in the west, and Sonoma in the east, and all points in between. We also have an administrative support center, which is just north of the Roanoke Park Cotati Library, where we house our collection services department, IT, facilities delivery, and then the administration. Next slide, please. So your library, the Roanoke Park Cotati Library, was first, the first iteration was in 1946 in Cotati, and as your community grew, so did the library. And so the first branch was opened in Roanoke Park in 1976. It's a Tier 1 library, but that library was remodeled and rebuilt in 2003, I believe. They had their 20-year anniversary last year. It's a Tier 1 library, which means it's one of our busiest and most well-staffed. It's also one of our largest at 24,000 square feet. We provide children's, teens, and adult services. We have an active community room and serves a diverse and vibrant community. The Roanoke Park Cotati Library was also the first library to premiere our Stay and Play program. And this was a grant-funded program where children and their families can come to explore toys, puzzles, building blocks, and more. Playing helps children use their imaginations to create stories and develop important creative skills. This program has since expanded to the Roseland Library and to Rincon Valley Library. The Roanoke Park Cotati Library also has the most state-of-the-art AV in our entire library system, and that is the reason why we hold our library commission meetings there. It also has the only bookstore in Roanoke Park and an active Friends and Lab program. We also have a study pods, and this is a new thing that we have in the library, and this is a small enclosed room where two people can sit and work together, where tutors can work with their students. And this is something that we're putting in many of our libraries. And it also has a seed library. So there's many wonderful things. And we're going to be doing a renovation there probably in the next 2 years as a result of a grant that we received from the California State Library. We're still waiting on the funds for that because of the state's budget situation. Those funds were put on hold, and we were a little worried that they were going to take them back. But we've been advocating, and we're hoping that those funds will be restored, and we will see them soon. Next slide, please. So some of our accomplishments from the last year include full implementation of Sunday hours, and this is at all of our 12 regional libraries. We're open from 1 to 5 on Sundays. We actually increased our attendance within the first month by 320%. We also completed our facilities master plan. We reviewed all 12 of our buildings and assessed what the building needs were for the next 20 years, and you should have a copy of that. If you don't, let me know. We also launched our campaign for the new Roseland Regional Library, which we are in the process of selecting a design build for now. Our library foundation has raised $1.2 million for that project. They have 3.6 total to raise. We also signed an MOU with County Probation Department for the juvenile hall to provide library services there. Most counties have about 3 to 4 hours of professional librarian service that they provide, and we are providing 20 hours a week. So this is a really wonderful program. The librarian does collection development. He also does book clubs and other programs for the youth at Juvenile Hall. And so that's a wonderful accomplishment for us in the county. And then lastly, as I alluded to, our Building Forward Together grants. And this was a program coordinated by the State Library. They have $476 million in funds. 6 of our libraries total receive funding, with Rohnert Park actually getting the most. I think they received $1.1 million from the state. There's a matching fund requirement, and the city of Rohnert Park and the library are doing a 50-50 match there. So that will, when that project is finished, it will be over a $2 million renovation. And it's primarily for infrastructure, so new HVAC, some lighting control panels, and things that the building needs after 20 years. Next slide, please. So last year was actually a banner year for the library, which is really good because most libraries in the state of California are actually experiencing a decline in both attendance and circulation, but that is not true at Sonoma County Library. Next slide, please. We had 1.2 million visitors last year, which was a 37% increase over 21-22, but take into account we had COVID, so we had a dip for those COVID years, and we're just getting out of that now. We also had our programming increase by 88%, and our program attendance increased by 64%. Next slide, please. So what you see here is a chart of our circulation. The orange is our digital circulation. The blue is our physical, which includes books, movies, audiobooks. As you can see, we're above 4 million, and this exceeds all prior years. So last year, we did better than every other year in the history of the library. You can also see that our digital circulation has increased by 84% since 2015, 2016. And we think a lot of that had to do with the pandemic. People were at home, they learned how to use our apps to download their ebooks and e-audiobooks, and that has since increased. Our total circulation is about 68% physical and 32% digital. Next slide, please. We have a $51.3 million budget, and that's divided into people, places, and resources. As you can see from the chart, 58% of our funding goes to people, salary and benefits, with $14 million going to resources and a little over $6 million to facilities. Our budget translates into a per capita cost of about $89 per person. And if you were to operate the library as an independent city library, you could expect to pay between $2 and $4 million, and you would not be able to provide the same level of service that we can offer as a county library. Next slide, please. We have both services for adults, teens, and children. Our adult services include access to millions of physical and digital titles, databases, and streaming services, and I'll talk a little bit more about those. Welcoming spaces, including investing in our library facilities to make them warm, inviting, comfortable, providing access to technology, including plenty of Chromebooks, Chrome kits, Wi-Fi hotspots, as well as computers in our libraries, and rich and diverse programming. Oh, you can. Thank you. Next one, please. Okay. We also have, lots of opportunities for adults to participate, including tutoring for our adult literacy program, meeting room space for friends groups, and then we provide free printing, which we know people love. And then we have our mobile library outreach vehicle, which is our Bibliobus, which you see pictured here. Next slide, please. For youth, we focus on 3 key areas: early learning, which focuses on developing and modeling pre-literacy skills with the goal of helping kids to be ready to enter kindergarten. We also focus on school support, which is our student success initiatives. We have a Student One card. Out of the 40 school districts in the county, 34 have signed up for this. And this is a library card that students get just, by going to school. And it allows them to check out materials. They can get both a regular library card as well as a Student One card. We also have reading programs both during the summer and after school, including Read to a Dog, which is a really popular program for young readers to gain confidence in learning how to read. They read to a very patient and kind dog who is non-judgmental. We also provide educator support. We have an education initiatives librarian who goes to the schools to teach the teachers about all the databases we provide, as well as how to get the most out of their library cards. And then we have a transitioning to adulthood program, which includes internships over the summer for our summer lunch at the library, as well as civic engagement and social justice initiatives. And lastly, we also have a high school diploma program called Career Online High School, and this is for adults. It's self-directed. It's not a GED. It's an actual high school diploma, and we have our graduation ceremony every year at the Rohnert Park Guttati Library. This year, I believe it is May 25th. You are all invited to attend, and I will make sure to send that out to you. Next slide, please. For our collections, we have nearly 600,000 physical items across 15 locations in multiple formats. We also share our catalog with Lake County and Mendocino County libraries. So if you can't find something at our branch, we can get you something from one of their locations. And then we also have a really unique program, which is partially funded with sales tax funds, called Link Plus. And this is a network of 70 libraries throughout the state of California that you can borrow materials from. It's especially good for rare and more, niche items. My husband's a filmmaker, and he likes to get really obscure, German expressionist films from the 1920s through Link Plus, and we get them from San Diego, from San Rafael, from San Francisco Public, from all over the state. And this is all free with your library card. Last year, residents borrowed over 20,000 items with a 96 fill rate through Link Plus. Next slide, please. Our digital collections, we have 147 different resources. One of the most popular is Libby, which people I know love. We exceeded 1 million circulations 2 years in a row, and in the state of California, we are actually number 5 out of 180 library jurisdictions. Sonoma County Library is number 5. People love Libby here, and whenever I'm out and about, people tell me about it. We also have other learning platforms, including LinkedIn Learning, where you can learn how to do software, you can learn how to take notes. It's a really fantastic service. And then Mango Languages for foreign language learning. And then we have a variety of different streaming services. Canopy is one of them. This is a movie streaming service, just like Hulu or Netflix, that allows you to stream films, mostly old movies, Criterion Collection, Oscar winners. So it's very highly curated, so you don't have to spend a half an hour trying to find something to watch, because everything on Canopy is really good. And then Press Reader has our newspapers, including the Press Democrat, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post. So if you like news, it's a great app. You can get all of your news there. Next slide, please. We also have what we call a library of things. And these are things like Stories to Go, which is a bag with a variety of different picture books that you can take with you, a DIY toolkit, and then the Parks Passes, which is another really popular program through the library. And these are actual parking passes. You can check them out, use them for 3 weeks, visit as many parks as you like. This is also provided by the state library. And again, we are number 5 in the state in terms of circulation for the Parks Passes. So we have about 400 of them. There is not much of a wait if you want to get one, but they're really wonderful and I highly recommend it. Next slide, please. We've also made technology one of our key areas of our focus, and that includes a variety of different ways to provide service to the community. One of these is through our biblioboxes, and these are 24/7 book lockers, kind of like the Amazon lockers where you can go pick up your item that you ordered. These are outside of our libraries. You don't have to worry about, when the library's open. You scan your library card and the box opens, and as soon as you pull your books out, they are automatically checked out to you. You do have to take all of your items. You can't leave them in there, but it's a really wonderful service. We have them at many of our locations, including Guerneville, Sonoma, Rincon Valley, and Healdsburg, and they are pouring the concrete for the bibliobox at the Roanoke Park Cotati Library. So we hope to have that by the end of this fiscal year. We're also moving towards a more flexible technology model in our computers. Instead of having stationary computers, we have laptop lending kiosks. So these are for use within the library. You check out a laptop, you can take it anywhere you like within the library and have more privacy than being at a stationary computer. And we also lend out Chrome kits, which are Chromebooks and Wi-Fi hotspots. And we have around 1,000 hotspots to lend, and these are for folks who either don't have reliable internet or don't have internet at home. They are first come, first serve. They're highly in demand, and we will never be able to satisfy as many people as want these. But it is a very popular service that we provide. Next slide, please. So this is one of, this was a quote from an article that I wrote in April in the Press Democrat, and this was one of the responses, which makes me very happy that people feel this way about the library. Our library was one of the very few institutions that improved during COVID. The increased access to electronic resources was huge, and I feel that way, and I definitely see it in the numbers and the number of people coming to the library. Next slide, please. And that concludes my presentation. Do you have any questions?
All right, thank you so much. Does anyone have questions? Yes.
So, hi, I'm wondering in the Cotati Roanoke Park Library if there's any kind of data on how many people from Cotati actually use the library in Roanoke Park?
We do have that data. I don't have it on me. I want to say it's like 40% of the users are from Cotati, but I can get you those specifics.
So I'm wondering if there has been any conversation in this 20-year plan in particular of at least a bridge library here, physically here, or, a bibliobox or a mobile that doesn't just go to a private residence, but actually comes like into the plaza maybe, or like comes regularly for, the kids to have a place to go for homework help after school that isn't, so far away for so many of our people who live here, and a place for seniors to gather as well.
We do have plans in our next fiscal year to purchase a second bibliobus, and our current bibliobus does do many stops throughout the county, but one of the things we found is that the capacity is only about 600 books, and many of the more remote and rural areas are asking for more, and they're also asking to be able to pick up their holds. And so this new bibliobus is going to be more of a traditional, basically bookmobile, and we're hoping that we will be able to make that change where people will be able to pick up holds. But we're also looking at putting both biblioboxes or kiosks, which are kind of like book vending machines, in locations like Cotati, Bodega Bay, and even at the airport. But one of the issues that we have with both of those is that we do need a reliable internet connection because it needs to interface with our library catalog. So I've actually talked to Damien about that, and we've actually, talked about possible locations for that. But it is definitely, one of our long-term goals.
To have a physical space or a bus stop?
Well, I think right now what we're looking at is more of like a vending machine. We can always add the bus stop. That is, we can always add that as well. So yes, and it would be my answer to that.
Okay, so there is, so I guess what I'm trying to ask is, do we not have enough people that use the library that we couldn't have a library here? We had one a long time ago. Can we have another one here?
Well, under
In
the
Cotati.
JPA, the cities provide the space. So you would need to provide a building or some other space for us to do that. In the meantime, in the interim, what we could provide is like a vending machine and, regular bibliobus stops. That would be the recommendation.
Okay, because it's my understanding that right now there's only one, and it's at like 1 o'clock on a Thursday at a private residence right now.
I'll have to look into that. So on our website, you can see where all the
Yeah.
bibliobus stops are, and you can always request additional stops. So our community engagement department is in charge of the bibliobus, and it's really dependent upon usage. So if they get a lot of requests from a particular area and people come out and they use it, then they'll be more likely to go back there. But the best way to request it is just to go to our website and make that request. But I can also just, I'll look into it and see, what the current schedule is, because it does
Yeah.
change every 6 months.
Okay, yeah, no, it's my understanding it's once a month, like Thursday at like 1. So it's like before kids get out of school, and it's at the Charles Street apartments or village, which is great because that's seniors, but it's like a private place. It's not a public area. Yes, I would very much like to advocate for a space, and I understand that part. So if we were to fund and create a space, then the county would be prepared to, I guess, if we build it, you will come, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. I mean, we would have to discuss, what that would look like. We're also a union environment, so that would have to be something to be negotiated with our union as well.
Perfect. But like, because it was here before, it could be again. Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, Councilmember Lemus.
Yes, thank you for sharing all the great things that the library is doing. I was just there at Roseland on Saturday. Is there a different site that you said you're raising money to build?
Yeah, so the Roseland campus is going to be located at the corner of, or at the intersection of Dutton and Hearn, and it's going to be a joint use facility with the city of Santa Rosa. So there will be a fire station, a library, and then eventually a community center. And we hope to break ground at the end of this year for that project.
Okay, thank you. And I have my Charlie Brown library card. They had this in 2015. So.
Oh yeah, so we're doing a series of new library cards, and we're gonna have a new Peanuts card. We're actually gonna have an artist design library card, which will be debuting in May, and then we have a new library card about freedom to read. So that's something we've been working on.
That's great. Thank you.
So, do you still use your?
I still use mine.
Oh, good. Okay.
The same one.
Other questions? Yes.
Well, not a question. I just want to say libraries are some of my favorite places, and I really applaud the programs you outlined, especially the juvenile hall, 20 hours a week. That's fantastic service. And last, it sounds like if I think my library card's wearing out, I can get one of these new fancy ones.
You can.
Oh, good.
You can.
All right.
Yeah, wait until the artist design one
Yeah,
comes
yeah,
out.
absolutely.
It's very cool.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you.
And I had one more question. I was really intrigued by the idea of the biblioboxes, and I wondered if you could just describe a little how that works technically. If it's outdoors, do people scan their card to open it up? Is that?
Yeah, so it's outdoors. When you put a hold, you have to select the bibliobox as your location. and then you'll get a notice that your item has arrived. You go there, you scan your card, your barcode, you put in your PIN, and then the box opens, and you pull out your materials, close the box, and you're ready to go. It's a really wonderful thing. And I love the Biblio boxes. I use them. I'm one of those self-service type people. But we also do have lovely staff who are very friendly. So if you like that personal touch and you like dealing with human beings, you can always go to the library when it's open.
Of course. And have you been in any conversation about possible biblio boxes too, or were you mostly talking about vending machines?
Well, we were looking at vending machines, but if you all want to have a biblio box, we just signed an agreement with Envisionware, which is our vendor, and it's like multi-year significant discounts. So if this is something that you want, we can definitely, talk to Damien about where we would put that.
Well, I'll definitely be following up with you on that. Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you so much for that presentation. The next item is approval of our final agenda. Were there any proposed changes to the agenda as printed?
No proposed changes, Mayor.
Okay, great. So we will move straight on to section 9, which is our citizen business and public comment for consent calendar items. Any member of the public wishing to speak to the council on any items listed on the consent calendar or any matters not listed on the agenda that are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the council may do so at this time. Pursuant to the Brown Act, the council is not allowed to consider issues or take action on any items not listed on the agenda. Pursuant to City Council Policy 2023-01, comments of any member of the public are normally restricted to a total of 3 minutes in length per person for matters not on the agenda, and a total of 3 minutes per person in length for any and all items on the consent calendar. The mayor may extend the time limit for a reasonable time where a disability accommodation has been requested. To facilitate public comment, the deputy city clerk will alert speakers when there are 30 seconds remaining. All right, so I opened it up to the in-person first for the minutes. So for this, why don't we open it up to Zoom first and see if there's any comment?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Sparks. Speaking to our Zoom attendees, if you'd like to make a public comment, please use the raise hand icon. We do have one raised hand. Neil Hancock, you have the floor.
I'm sorry, Neil, can I cut in just for a second while we get the volume turned up in the chambers?
Okay, no problem. Can you hear me?
I think there we go. Now we can hear you just fine. Thank you.
Okay, there we go. I've got headphones and microphone on, so hopefully that helps. But I'd just like to say thank you for the sidewalk gap closures. Public comment last Wednesday, that was much better. Well, I mean, that was very good. Thank you very much. There was the ability to look at the plans, and I was pleasantly surprised by the way that they'd come out, and just wanted to give good credit to where all the hard work has gone to make that happen. So that'll end my public comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment.
There are no further hands on Zoom, Mayor Sparks.
All right, thank you very much. So I'll open up to the room. If anyone would like to make a public comment, please come up, Laurie. We've had a request for an accommodation for extra time, so there will be a 4-minute comment right now.
Sorry. The theme of my citizens' comment tonight is unanswered. You've unanswered requests, replies. I never hear from any of you. One of the problems is that the city staff especially keeps us in the dark. All of the council are unaware of how the city staff really works. I've tried to get an agenda item where there is about human habitations of vehicles, and I've gotten nowhere. Not a single reply from anyone. So, and also about whether there was an ordinance, was still suspended because in 2016, you had a building crisis resolution and it wasn't ever rescinded. So we don't know if the human habitation of vehicles is still in effect. Nobody will answer. That's one of my unanswered questions. I've asked other citizens to come here tonight to get answers to why this is happening and why you are citing people for human habitation of vehicles in 2024. For 6 months, you have not reeled in code enforcement as I have been asking before this council. All I have received is personal consequences for this request. I always have personal consequences for speaking before the council. The latest consequence is that at a closed hearing last month, the city's code enforcement attorney was so desperate that he went after me as a legal strategy. Mr. Smith basically accused me of collusion with my supervising attorney in my job as a paralegal. He was misrepresented my public comments I have wrote or said to the hearing officer. I was so upset at this retaliatory act by Mr. Smith, I had to leave the proceedings. This interfered with my planned paralegal work for the attorney that I would present the evidence book at the hearing. These are the kinds of actions your city staff and attorneys do. It's not the first time either. I've lost count of the so-called crimes I've accused by your attorneys. For example, perjury when there was none. Please, city staff and attorneys, give me a hint of what personal consequences I will have for speaking and presenting tonight my unanswered questions. I know it is coming, it always does. I've made copies for the public at the back table. Now, with the rest of my time, I'll read to you some of the unanswered questions I have posed to the city. Why does the city allow threats of fines more than the value of property? Currently, a fine of $904,000 for. Why is it? Unanswered question. Why is the citizen called about water issues?
30 seconds.
Oh, sorry. And this is sent up through the community development director and to the code enforcement attorney. Why is Noah Hausch, the community development director, encouraging neighbors to provide evidence of code violations? Why did the 46 subsequent videos sent to the city then be used as city evidence proving human habitation? Last one, real quick. Why has, for 6 months, there's a log of these videos and the city will not entered into evidence and will not tell who wrote this? Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Is there anyone else wishing to make a comment tonight? Come on.
Yes. I have a problem with the way your city is functioning. It's blatant shown disregard for the Brown Act and the U.S. Constitution. There was a Democratic president named Harry Truman who famously had the phrase, quote, "the buck stops here," displayed on his desk. You are in that position and are responsible for what your staff does, specifically your code enforcement tyrant, Robert Smith. The Brown Act states that you may take no action on public comment other than a brief response or direction to staff on public comment, so please don't attempt to defend yourself against my allegations. Your code enforcement person, Robert Smith, who doubles as a prosecutor in cases where the appellant doesn't roll over, has a conflict of interest at best and is jeopardizing this phony process at worst. Typical of city enforcement personnel, there's no effort on his part to get compliance, but a strong push to punish, which is a direct reflection on this council. I am not arguing a specific case, and it shouldn't matter who the appellant is. These are the concepts which need to be addressed. The Brown Act gives the public the right to record meetings of the legislative body. A hearing under your jurisdiction qualifies. There's a problem when the city can record, a hired videographer can record, but a citizen cannot, to ensure no tampering occurs. Mr. Smith didn't have a problem with this until he was obviously perturbed that things weren't going his way at the hearing. There was no distraction or disturbance as our body cams were simply hanging in open view. The 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution states there's to be no selective enforcement. This was put in to aid blacks after the Civil War and has been applied to other protected groups. If retaliation is allowed for exercising your First Amendment rights of seeking redress of grievances, you're opening yourselves up to a huge lawsuit. Perhaps you don't care because you think the money won't be coming out of your pockets. Perhaps you can explain to me how your city can go after cargo containers in one person's yard, but ignore others on the same court. Perhaps you can tell me how the width of one person's driveway is not in compliance when every other driveway on the same court is the same size. Perhaps you can tell me how a habitation violation using a motorhome is valid when these potential abodes were removed long ago. Perhaps you can tell me how the city insists that 2 PG&E meters were present when only one exists. Perhaps you can explain why you need a permit to remove outside electrical wiring from conduit, which is non-functional. Perhaps you can tell me why you can't park vehicles in a setback area as they are removable and not structures. We also have the 8th Amendment to the Constitution about unreasonable fines. When you fine a person up to the value of his
30
property,
seconds.
most would consider that unreasonable. It would seem to me that weaponizing the justice system isn't solely the purview of our federal government. You need to take a look at Sullivan versus New York Times or the Brown Act concerning freedom to criticize government officials. You need to decide if this is America or the banana republic many of you would like it to be so you can dispose of those who don't agree with you. Thank you very much, Mayor.
All right, thank you very much for your comment. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak? All right, welcome.
Good evening, Council. I've attended one meeting, I believe, in the past of yours. And for those of you who weren't here, my name is Adina Flores, and I'm the largest activist in Sonoma County. And I'm also a former government employee. I was the executive assistant to the board and superintendent for Santa Rosa Schools. My mom was the former finance director of Runner Park for over 20 years. And the one thing that she emphasized my entire childhood and teenage years, as well as into adulthood, was that the city of Cotati was completely corrupt. And my mom was fired for questioning the budget. So that speaks volumes. I'm here this evening because the Press Democrat has done a wonderful job of creating smear campaigns against those who question government malfeasance. And what I can see here tonight is we only have a handful of individuals present as constituents on behalf of the entire community. And that speaks to the lack of involvement as private citizens. I connected with Ms. Alderman through comments on an article published in the Press Democrat. I do not know her personally, but I'm very impressed and grateful for the work that she does on behalf of the people of the city of Cotati. She's extremely smart and knowledgeable, and she's obviously been researching issues for years. So her comments echo my own. I've actually, as the former executive assistant to Santa Rosa Schools, was threatened by the federal government for asking about if I could see the books for Generation Housing, which is endorsing housing developments across the Bay Area. So Ms. Jenny Close was my board president at Santa Rosa City Schools, and ironically, she's the executive director of Generation Housing. So we see that a lot, that nonprofits are a front for those in government capacities to move money to each other. And so there is a great lack of transparency. I am not sure why Ms. Alderman's inquiries have gone unanswered for this long. The Press Democrat just got caught in a tremendous lie today. Ironically, they wrote a hit piece about me for requesting records, and then because I requested information they had shared, they told me to request more records. So a bit of a hypocrisy, but they did get caught in a lie today between them and the county of Sonoma. To show that they have been collaborating to smear the name of private citizens who are attempting to bring transparency forward. The same experience has been shared by Ms. Alderman, and so I did tell the Press Democrat, although they are liquidating their assets and have no physical building that I know of at this point, I do have court papers to serve them. So because this is a tremendous defamation case in which Ms. Alderman, myself, Mr. Frazier, and several others are involved, I would appreciate either a settlement so we can start some kind of group to hold you all accountable, or we can go to court and it will be very entertaining. Thank you.
All right, thank you for your comment. Is there anyone else who would like to make a public comment? Yeah, well, you're welcome to come up.
This is the first time I've been here. Next month, I'll have been in Cotati for 5 years. I'm a resident of Charles Street Village on Charles Street, and that is a great concern to me, Charles Street. A neighbor of mine, Suzanne Bloomberg, suggested I get a hold of Ben Ford, and I wrote my issues down, my concerns, but I never got it mailed in time. So I have this here for you. I'll just briefly read it. My name is Diane Alexander. I live at Charles Street Village, apartment 14, at the corner of Charles Street and Ross Street. We live on a very dangerous one-block residential street in Cotati. There is no posted speed limit. The speed hump they finally put in states 15 miles per hour, and cars, motorcycles, and pickup trucks use this one-block street as a speedway that connects Old Redwood Highway and East or West Cotati Street. Living at Charles Street Senior Village, my car has a parking space inside the property. My car and I exit the property onto Charles Street. There is no notice for anyone zooming down Charles Street that we have a driveway at the village there where cars are going to come out. They've marked both sides of the driveway red. There, after the red, there are 2 pickup trucks that park right in front of the hump. I had to ask my son, who's a retired CHP officer, what a speed hump was, and he said, you know, you didn't make the bump. But they do, as soon as they go over that, and I come out, and I usually turn to go up to Main Street, I will be part of a head, you know, I mean, I will be side hit with it. And as soon as they go over, I can see from my corner that they speed up to go from the speed hump down to go onto the next busy street. It makes no sense to me.
30 seconds.
Excuse me? Okay.
30 seconds left.
Nothing posted there, which really concerns me. And just trying to make you aware that something needs to be done to make this one-block residential street safe from speeding cars, motorcycles, pickup trucks. I sincerely hope the city council can help fix these, what I feel are accidents waiting to happen every time I go out of the driveway in my car. Thank you. And may I give this to you, please? I'm sorry I didn't.
Certainly.
All right. Thank you for your comment. Would anyone else like to address the city council tonight? Anyone else on Zoom? Okay, thank you to everybody who took, you don't see any hands, do you? Okay, thank you for everyone who took the time to come and speak with us tonight. So this takes us to the consent calendar. Is there anyone on the council who would like to pull a consent calendar item? Yes.
I don't want to pull it, but just my name is incorrect on the first page of the Measure S report.
All right.
Yeah, we'll get it fixed.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Thank you for your vigilance. Anyone else would like to pull anything? Okay. I'd be looking for a motion then.
Move to approve the consent calendar with that one change.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? The consent calendar items are approved unanimously. that takes us to the direction on future agenda items. Is there anyone on the council who would like to make a suggestion for a future agenda item? Okay, hearing no direction on future agenda items, we will move on to our regular agenda items. So the first one on our list is the third quarter financial update for the fiscal year 2023-2024.
So good evening, Mayor, council members, and members of our community. I'm Angela Corder, Director of Administrative Services, and tonight I'll be presenting to you our Q3 financial update for our current fiscal year, which is 23-24. Our quarter financial report is included in the council agenda packet on pages 90 to 97. Additionally, included items are the resilience evaluation for this quarter, which are pages 98 to 101. Again, this draft updated from our last meeting, as well as the quarterly investment report as of March 31st, which is on pages 102 to 106. Next slide, please. Within this report, we'll provide, or the presentation will provide a summary of the citywide overview of our budget to actuals, then go into our major funds, which consist of the general fund and water and sewer operating funds, followed by a summary of our cash and investments. Next slide. So to start off, we'll go citywide. This covers all of our city funds. Next slide. So as a summary of the citywide revenues and expenses compared to budget as of March 31st, 2024, as well as the comparative actual revenues and expenses as of March 31st, 2023 for each fund type. Overall, revenues and expenditures citywide are in line with expectations, where revenues are approximately 65%, if not more, and budgeted expenses are at 64% more budget. So we would be at 75%, but we want to, give us some buffer. Just as a reminder, most activity for the city is managed within the general fund, and the other two major funds are the enterprise funds or business-like operations that are run for the water and wastewater sewer. We're going to dive into those major funds in just a moment. We also have our next budget study session planned for May 13th, where we'll be evaluating the next year's proposed budgets for most of these funds, specifically the special revenue funds and all these other internal services and capital projects. And so it's a good way to see what we're planning for the budget for next year. Next slide. So fund type variances where the revenue were less than 65% was the general fund revenues, where the differences are primarily due to the pending receipts for sales tax and property tax. We're going to go into that a little bit later with the general fund. And then the capital projects, the differences for revenues and expenses are due to the timing of projects. So those are variable based on funding transfers from the variable special revenue funds or general revenue funds for those projects. Next slide. So deep dive into more of the general fund for the third quarter. Next slide. Here's the comparative revenue and expenditures for the general fund operations. For operating revenues through Q3, there's approximately $467,000 or a 7.7% increase over the same period in the last fiscal year, although revenues are only at 61.4% of the budget through this period for the current year. So comparing the budget to the actuals, we're only at 61%, but when you compare it to prior year, we actually have that increase of more than 7%. And again, that's due to the timing of the receipts for sales tax, which is the largest general fund revenue source, but receipts are received 2 months after the period where they're paid from the businesses and then received to the city. Overall, cumulative general fund expenditures increased from the prior year by approximately 14%, or $1.1 million. Most of the increase was due to increased transfers out for capital projects and contract services, as well as the ADP made to CalPERS. So we made some specific additional funding advances to CalPERS to pay down our unfunded pension liability. So those weren't as significant last year, so they're all within this period for this year. Packet page 94 provides the breakdown of the expenditures by expense type as well as the department, which shows that the spending by general fund departments, they're very consistent with the prior year with noted increases across all departments except for city council, which does not get an allocation of the ADP. And the increases are consistent where it's the contracts, services, as well as personnel benefit expenses. Additionally, the police department has had trainees, and so they do have some increased overtime related to, and then the coverage for those training has increased over time compared to just prior year. Next slide. So here's my my pictograph where I like to show the overall revenues for the city as a point in time. So these categories break out the total revenues by type. And it's really interesting, you know, about half of it consistent is the sales tax, where if you break that sales tax pie, or it's not a pie anymore, right? It's a box in half. Half of it is from Measure S, the other half is Bradley Burns. But for the first time since I've been making this graph, which has been a while, the interest earnings has actually had a piece where you can actually read it. So it's been increased over that 80,000, which is typically the size where you can't really read the graphics. So everything below that 80,000 in that bottom corner is the charges for service for public safety as well as public works. And then the transfers in, which are the special revenue funds that actually come back into to fund general fund expenditures.
I'm sorry, could we pause just for a second? Lori, and would you guys mind taking your conversation out into the hallway if that's okay? Thank you.
Just give a moment. So those are the transfers in, and again, those are scheduled throughout time, and so that is expected to increase to be in line with the budget as of the end of the year when we're receiving the rest of the funds in. Next slide. So onto our water and sewer enterprise funds for the same period, again through Q3 2024. Next slide. The following table includes the cumulative revenues and expenses comparison through the first 3 quarters of the fiscal year 22-23 compared to 23-24, and a revenue budget to actual comparison for the fiscal year for the enterprise funds. The water and wastewater fund revenues are made up of primarily charges for services, as well as supplemental connection fees and other revenues and development fees. The revenues compared to prior year are up 22% for water, and wastewater is up 26%. This is primarily related to the move to monthly billing, so we can actually show those revenues in the period that are collected compared to last year where we had to wait for the 2-month cycle to go through. It'll be great to see more history with this, with the move to monthly, to be able to draw better conclusions for the comparisons from the prior year. For fiscal year 23-24, most expenses are in line with budget. One significant difference is the decrease in expenses for water. That was primarily related to a decrease in contract services related to the timing of the water flushing program. So we expect that to kind of come back into a line at the end of the fiscal year. There's also the one-time payment for wastewater debt service for the wastewater, which is decreased due to the capital outlay for the wastewater treatment cost compared to prior year. So last year we had a debt payment that we aren't going to have this year. Next slide. So on to cash and investments. Next slide. As of March 31st, the total cash and investments, I put was in excess, that was incorrect, is approximately 18.1 million at that point in time. This is in line with the city's adopted investment policy. We're really trying to actively manage these investments to get the best return for these funds, as they're just being held for future projects or in lieu, for other expenditures for budgets to be. There's enough to meet the operational needs for the next 6 months in the fiscal year, And we do utilize a pooled cash investments process. So it's not, even though we have funds that show, you know, there's this much that's in the general fund, this much is in the, you know, gas tax fund or in the water and sewer fund, we don't actually have different bank accounts for each individual one. We have an active pooled of all the funds amounts in the categorizations that are outlined on the slide. And then we hold those funds for each one of those amounts. So the table, next slide. The table here shows the cash and investments held by those different city funds as of March 31st, 2024, as well as the allocation of those pooled funds. So on the top, I believe the top one shows all the different funds with their pie pieces, showing the general operating fund with approximately 3.6 million and so forth, as well as that cash and investments by holding of that 18.1 million, where it shows it's primarily held in the U.S. bank account or bank trust, as well as that camp fund. Next slide. So in conclusion, the budget right now is considered primarily on track. We have identified some variances with expenditures and revenues that are tracking as expected. Staff is continuing to monitoring these variances and providing updates to City Council. We have the next budget study session coming on May 13th, and that is a Monday, so it's an unusual date, so I want to make sure people are aware of that, as well as a tentative budget adoption date for June 11th. And I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, thank you. Any questions? I had a question, which is just in the packet, the indicators for our fiscal resilience plan. I forget the name, but the green, yellow, red indicators are in there. We had some discussion in our last time talking about this, about adjusting some of the indicators, and I didn't have a chance to do a back and forth comparison. Did anything change on the details of what indicators we used between the last time we spoke and now, or is it just the same as?
So the indicators, what we took and modified was we separated out the water and sewer funds, so they were on separate rather than having them combined, even though there are some similar and they're listed in our policy together. We wanted to keep them separate so that we weren't forcing a yellow dot for something that only affects one fund. So that was one thing that we did take your considerations. What we did for the comparative periods, where we were looking at 9 months to an annualized budget, we did annualize those revenues, where we were taking in the 9 months plus 3 months prior. So it takes in the full 12 months to a full 12-month budget, which is the 9-month budget plus 3 months of the prior year budget, to do the comparison. That seemed to work fairly well. So we did that for both the general fund as well as the enterprise funds for that comparison. We did move the prior year comparison that we had in the reference section. We kind of felt like that was going to be something that was going to be a desire to know going forward, and so it really rose to the level of being included as an indicator, as opposed to, or at least a comparison point, as opposed to a footnote. And so we did move those prior year comparison ratios up into the actual calculations section rather than the footnote. I'm trying to think of, I think that was primarily the changes that we made. And in doing so, it brought most of them into the green, especially, the general fund, there was the one, but it also highlighted better indicators for the water fund for the rate change, and then the sewer fund for the fund balance. So it allowed it to be, in my perspective, more precise and indicative of what we really want to look at.
Great, thank you for that great explanation. Yes.
So, put another way, for the water and wastewater, it helped highlight the things that we discussed last time about changes in rates. So it appears now that we have 2 yellows on those, which are things that ultimately we might want to take a look at, since we have 5-year plans on those. And we might want to, since they keep coming up yellow, we might want to talk about at some point when we talk about how we use this, you know, how many periods do we let it stay yellow before we actually do something. So for instance, we know on the water that we've had 2 years of increases higher than what we had anticipated. At what point, you know, can we say, well, maybe we should reevaluate our rate study rather than let it run its whole course? So is that fair?
I absolutely, and that should probably be a footnote in there that we are engaging to evaluate the rate study currently, and so that should be a footnote on there that we are aware of this, and so it's going to be yellow because we are aware of it, and it does fall out of it, but that it's under evaluation, and we're going to be working with our evaluator on it.
So you see that as our ability to put a note in there to identify what's causing it, and then we can choose to take action to get ahead of it rather than let it stay through the period of the plan.
Yeah, I was just going to add generally that we're kind of all experimenting a bit in what works best. So I think it's going to be a little fluid for a while until we really, as a group, decide this is what makes sense and how we want to use this, or if other indicators come up that we really should be including, or maybe some of these are not as useful and we'll drop them off. So it'll be a bit of an evolving process for a little while. But specifically to your question about rates, that is both on the water and the sewer, because the major expenses in both of those funds are from outside agencies. The water agency charging us to buy water, and the Santa Rosa Subregional Plant charging us to treat our wastewater. Those are such major particularly in the wastewater case, are such major expenses in those funds. If they're out of alignment for too long, it bears looking at them closer to see if we need to change anything.
Right, because the last thing that we kind of try to ultimately avoid is big spikes. So where we can, you know, kind of get ahead of it, if you will. I think that's maybe prudent for us to put as we start working with this to kind of look at that. Thank you.
Yes, Vice Mayor.
Just a quick comment along those lines is in that note, for anything that's yellow, it should probably indicate if it's been more than once, since some of the triggers are about how long, like Councilmember Harvey said, we should just keep track how long it's been yellow. I know this is the first one, so it's all the first yellow, but.
All right, I'd like to open this to public comment. Is there anybody in the room who would like to make a public comment? Right, let's look to Zoom.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Sparks. Speaking to our Zoom attendees, if you'd like to make a public comment, please use the raise hand icon. Mayor Sparks, that'll end public comment.
All right, thank you. I don't believe we need any kind of vote on this. Is there any more discussion or any last questions on the council? All right.
I just would like to say thank you. I found it very helpful, and seeing the presentation and then seeing this kind of dashboard thing I find to be very helpful.
All right, thank you very much. And we are going to take a 5-minute break, and then we will reconvene in 5 minutes to move on. we are going to start back up. Thank you for bearing with us for that brief break. The next item on our agenda is the annual police chief report to the community.
Good evening, Mayor Sparks, Vice Mayor Ford, council members. So it's my privilege to present to you the Cotati Police Department's annual report for the calendar year of 2023. My intention is to go through the slide deck and present some brief overviews of operational and organizational activities, as well as various data points and stats, and providing some context when applicable, and obviously to answer any questions that you may have. It's a bit of a lengthy report with a lot of data, a lot of information, a lot to digest. So I will move through some of these slides fairly quickly. Obviously slow me down if you have, again, any questions or any comments. So next slide, please. So we start the report just from a message from me, as is also posted on our website, touching on our overarching mission to our promise to deliver equitable public safety service to our community. I can't say it enough that we not only value the strong community support that we have, but we absolutely depend on it and want to ensure that we continue to earn the community's trust in everything that we do. Next slide, please. As you all know, Michael Parrish retired as Chief of Police in December of 2023, and it's important to recognize his accomplishments throughout his 13 years of service to the Cotati Police Department. This slide is dedicated to him and his achievements listed here, and to include anything from deploying body-worn cameras, coordinating with SAFE, moving away from canine apprehension dogs, and now we have Dolly. Everybody loves Dolly. And deployment of electric vehicles, and actually this report was under obviously his tenure for the annual report. So moving forward with that. Next slide, please. It's just our table of contents. Hopefully we got the numbers right. I think we're pretty good. So next slide, please. Organizational chart. Just to note, so I recently promoted one sergeant, Sergeant Deaton, and there's 2 corporal vacancies that are there. These aren't extra positions in addition to the officers, but they are supervisory type of positions that any of the officers could go into. So they're not added positions, they're just internally part of those positions. We have a total of 21 positions in the department, 13 are sworn and 18 are non-sworn, with our dispatcher and our police services aide and our records analyst. Next slide, please. So moving into some numbers, so we had 11,217 total events in 2023. So we split them up between calls for service and officer initiated. And I'll get into one of the main cores of this annual report has to do with RIPA, the Racial and Identity Profiling Act. And sometimes folks, I say this for the community, sometimes they get confused with what a stop means versus officer initiated and what that means. So those are 2 different things. An officer initiated could be anything that otherwise they're not dispatched to. So that doesn't even necessarily mean they had a contact with a person. That could be, driving down the street and decide to park the car and go out on foot patrol. That's an officer initiated activity. They could do a bar check, things like that, where they'd have contact with people, but it wouldn't be a stop per se, something with RIPA. So there's more on that, and I'll talk a lot more about RIPA, but I just wanted to touch on that because sometimes we get questions about that with regards to what officer initiated means. So looking at the numbers themselves, they're relatively, there's nothing that jumps out necessarily in terms of previous years. A little bit up in our calls for service and officer initiated, but in looking a little deeper in the data, there was nothing that jumped out as a reason necessarily, a cause and effect for that at the moment. Next slide, please. Looking at arrest statistics. So for some clarity, obviously the blue is where we had suspects who were arrested and booked into county jail. That was slightly up in 2023. Where it says cited, those are not traffic citations. We had 1,142 traffic citations. These are arrest citations. So the most common is a warrant, where someone has a warrant that is citable. We're not required to take them to the jail. We can issue them a cite with a court date, and then they can proceed from there. So that's what we're talking about here when we're talking about arrest statistics. We're talking about from the cited standpoint, those are warrants they're technically arrests, but they're arrests cited out. And then 849 detention release, and we put this in here because obviously 849 isn't necessarily something that's common terminology, and it's basically comes from a penal code, and it's anyone who's arrested and released from custody, and there's some there are laws as far as what that can mean. Sometimes if you just detain somebody and arrest somebody for intoxication only or low-level drug crimes, that constitutes a detention only, not necessarily an arrest. And also, this includes subjects who are arrested but no charges are filed. So we take it off the top. So if someone was arrested, but then ultimately there's no charges filed, we consider that an 849. The law considers that an 849. So that could be included in that statistic as well. Next slide, please. Looking at our NIBRS. So NIBRS is the National Incident-Based Reporting System. And the main thing to note about this is just that this system doesn't directly correlate with California penal codes. So they use their own terminology. So they roughly translate, but just in plain English, the way they're here, for example, aggravated assault, that means a weapon was used or displayed or a victim suffered great bodily injury. Simple assault is like what we consider a simple battery with maybe no injuries or low injuries. Intimidation is like threatening somebody. Again, those are different penal code sections, kind of cross-pollinate with some of the terminology here. But again, looking at the numbers, the stats are a little bit, simple assault is down a bit, but everything else is relatively, aggravated assault is down a bit. But again, nothing to really of a special note, at least in terms of what happened in 2023. And we've looked through these reports too to see if there's anything that's worth mentioning beyond that, and there isn't with regards to these stats, at least. Next slide, please. Looking at property crimes, again, doesn't directly correlate with the penal code. Theft is, certain types of theft are up a bit in 2023. So we'll, obviously that's one of the biggest things that we concern ourselves with, at the various theft, whether that's vehicle theft or residential burglary type theft. We have a lot. We have commercial theft that we're obviously concerned about, shoplifting types of theft, and those sorts of calls for service that happen on a fairly regular basis, that we're being as diligent as we possibly can to try to thwart those efforts. Next slide, please. Looking at other crimes, when you really, the one thing that jumps out, at least it jumps out to me, first and foremost, they have the all other crimes, and it's kind of a mishmash of a lot of other crimes. We try to distill it out and make sure that there's nothing, again, that jumps out where we see some sort of problem that we're going to need to address and do some targeted enforcement or that sort of thing. It just ends up just kind of being a bin for purposes of NIBRS reporting. And the other thing that's up is DUI. We've done a lot of DUI enforcement in 2023, which I think is a good thing. And obviously we can't talk enough about the safety of not drinking and driving.
And I'm sorry to interrupt. I think when you're facing away from the mic, it's not quite picking you up as well.
Thank you.
Just for the folks who are, I can hear you fine in the room, but just for the folks on Zoom.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's about as far as it's going to get to me. Get a longer neck. All right, we are on next slide. Slide 7, please. Great. Citations. So we had 1,142 traffic citations in 2023. Again, very similar, fairly similar to 2022. One of the things, when it says warning, we're talking about written warnings in here. We categorize that as a citation, as a written warning. We also do give a lot of verbal warnings too. It's not necessarily captured in this data as well. So there could be other traffic stops that happened where there was verbal warnings, but there was no either written warning or some sort of other citation that otherwise occurred. Next slide, please. On to citizen complaints, as mentioned, so we had 11,217 events and interactions in 2023. So dispatch calls, self-initiated activities, interactions that we had with our citizens and community members. So in all those events, we had 4 complaints. That's 0.03% of everything we handled in 2023. And of course, we always strive for 0 complaints, but to only have 4 complaints is extremely low number and is down from last year, which was 9. The particular complaints that we had, essentially there was 2 for conduct and 2 for force. And again, these are allegations. Someone made allegations about an officer's conduct or about force, excessive force that the allegation about, that the officer used. So specifically, there was one complaint, the two complaints regarding conduct. So one was about an outcome that the complainant didn't like the outcome of the investigation. Like, for example, the district attorney didn't file the charges and they thought that they should. That was one of the complaint that was noted here. The other one was about an officer's conduct, and basically the complainant thought the officer they didn't like their tone, thought they were rude. Both of those complaints were deemed unfounded. For example, in watching the body-worn camera footage to confirm how the officer's conduct was. You know, sometimes when we have these things, and I'll just touch on it, you know, we'll have perceptions from a complainant perceives that an officer's being rude, and we watch it, and we, you know, think we're being objective when we watch that, and we try to be objective, and we say, oh, the officer doesn't seem rude. But also taking into account the fact that someone may experience an officer's tone a certain way when we may otherwise think it's, objectively, whatever that means necessarily, that the tone was fine, or that there wasn't a violation of policy or anything like that. But we still want to be sensitive to the fact that someone didn't have a good experience with an officer, and we want to do everything we can to try to right that in any way that we can. So anyway, the second group, the other two, were two use of force complaints. Just because of the nature of the complaint itself, we outsourced that for internal affairs investigations and didn't deal with that in-house. And when I say in-house, not through supervisory management level within the police department. Both of those were deemed categorically unfounded as determined by the independent administrative investigation, so not factually true. And there's some definitions. In fact, why don't we go to the next slide, slide 9. Yep. That there's some definitions there toward the bottom, but basically unfounded, since everything in 2023 of those 4 complaints was unfounded, that the investigation established the allegation is simply not true. Sometimes we get asked about SB2 complaints. SB2 is basically various, about 9 factors that are reportable to post for peace officers decertification. One of those things that we report, and again, we're reporting allegations. So even if the allegation is completely untrue, we still report it to post if it meets one of those criteria. And one of those criteria is any allegation of excessive or unreasonable force. So we did have those 2 allegations, even though they were unfounded, we did report them to post. Again, we go to great lengths to resolve any kind of complaint that we have to the complainant's satisfaction. Anyone can make a complaint against the police department in person, online, email, via phone call. We accept all complaints, and we investigate all complaints thoroughly from beginning to end. So we reach out to the complainant first things first, get what happened, and then investigate from there. The one thing I do want to say, actually, we already went over that. Okay, next slide, please. All right. So we have a partnership with the SAFE team, which provides outreach for the unhoused. This is an explanation of the SAFE team and the interactions that we've had. We have some statistics. Go ahead and go to the next slide on 11. So in that, these are the statistics that SAFE gave us. They provided us with these statistics. So the vast majority of the calls that are dispatched, and that's them dispatching their folks out, just like they are with the police department in the way that we get dispatched. And that can be to any kind of assistance involving mental health, homelessness, or any kind of low-level medical care they may be dispatched to. When you look at their statistics, most of what they do are some sort of public assist, and that's kind of a generalized term for how they may offer some sort of resources or help to those individuals as well. And again, we work in partnership with them. Anytime that law enforcement isn't a necessity or isn't needed for safety concerns with regards to these sort of incidents, we always love for the SAFE team to come and handle it with their professionals that are obviously trained to do that. Our training that we have, unfortunately, there's always going to be a first responder component to some sort of incidents that happen with those that are suffering from mental health or the unhoused. And so we've sometimes worked with the SAFE team. Sometimes the SAFE team will not come to certain events just because they're deemed a law enforcement only response because they're dangerous or some sort of violence associated with that. So just to provide a little context with that. Next slide, please. Okay, so getting into the Racial Identity Profiling Act, and I'll talk a little bit about RIPA and what that is, because I think Last year, it was touched on really briefly. There was a lot of information that was in the staff report at the time from last year, but it was for only a small piece of time. So this is over most of the data that we have, or I think all of the data is related to 2022 and 2023 that we collected. So I'm going to go over some of that. I did want to go over just a few definitions just for context as we go along with the actual numbers to follow. So I want to also be clear about my position regarding stops and what a stop is and what the department's position is regarding, you know, how we conduct ourselves during these stops and that sort of thing. So first of all, a RIPA stop is defined as any detention or search with the goal to collect perceived demographic and other detailed data regarding pedestrian and traffic stops. That's what the data is supposed to be doing. That's what the RIPA board was put together for. And the slide 12 talks about a little bit about the board and a little bit of the historical on that. But the bottom line is a RIPA stop by definition is a detention or a search. And that's pretty simple in that regard. So when you hear the word stop, sometimes that definition can get away from folks when they start saying, well, you stopped me, you did this. And if it wasn't a detention or it wasn't a search, it's not by definition a RIPA stop, right? And so what happens is, just boots on the ground, is when someone has a detention or a search at the end of that, then an officer fills out basically a form that has perceived data regarding their contact with that person, right? And we'll go through some of those numbers here in a minute. One of the things I do want to talk about is, because a stop can be anything, it can be in a car, it can be just interaction with someone else, but one of the things that comes up a lot, and one of the reasons that the RIPA board was even put together in the first place, was the notion of a pretext stop. And what's a pretext stop mean? And so there's a lot of talk about what a pretext stop mean, what even the operational definition of a pretext stop is. Members of the RIPA board can't even agree on that sometimes. So I want to at least offer up a little bit of information on that and what that means in terms of what our officers are doing and what their mind frame is and what they're trained to do and what I'm training them to do in the way that they do stops and the way that they interact with members of our community and attempt to make sure that we're not going down any kind of road of any sort of bias or anything when they're involved in these sort of incidents. So pretext a lot of times is used when officers are supposedly doing these, quote, investigative hunches, right? And so the term pretext is often referenced with investigative actions that aren't seemingly grounded in foundational law, right? So I want to be clear, in that vein, our officers do not conduct pretext stops. So our officers are not to do investigative hunches because they're illegal. They are only to follow the law in the way that from reasonable suspicion or any kind of probable cause that they have. So Cal DOJ defines a pretext stop as when an officer stops someone for one reason, but really instead is intending to use the stop as an investigative hunch regarding a different crime by itself that wouldn't amount to any sort of reasonable suspicion or probable cause, right? So that's an unlawful stop, right? Whether it's based in bias or racism, whatever that is, it's still an unlawful stop. So our officers are not to conduct that, period. That's that. So you'll hear some folks say, well, or their agencies will say, yeah, we do pretext stop because it's legal. They're then doing a different definition of what pretext stop is, right? So the bottom line is that our officers must have specific articulable facts that justify a legal basis for that stop. So I just want to be really clear on that. And sometimes, you know, if an officer sees a law violation, like a vehicle runs a stop sign, and another legal cause for further investigation occurs, right? So they walk up to the car and they see a gun in the back of the car, right? That's not a pretext stop for the gun. That's just that's an extra law violation that they're seeing in front of them that gives them more probable cause, again, going down the line in terms of the legality of their detention. So I just want to be clear on that. So in any event, all that aside, most certainly and most importantly, our officers shall never conduct any stop or search based on race, sex, ethnicity, age, etc., and must never have bias influence any of their police actions. And I'm very sensitive to that, and I make sure that that's a constant conversation in our department and that the organizational culture starts right there and the way that it plays out and the way we interact with the community that doesn't play into any action that they do, whether we're going to call it a stop or any sort of interaction that they have with the community or any of the decision making that they do on any given day. So I wanted to be clear about that before we got into some of the numbers. We go through a lot of anti-bias training, character development and self-reflection, teaching them empathy. I mentioned organizational culture, routinely reinforcing expectations, diligent supervision, which is why I'm a fan of supervise. Anytime if I can promote a couple corporals at some point, those sort of things, just having any line of supervision that helps with this is really what's going to matter in terms of when not only they make the stop, but the conduct that those officers have during that stop and how they're treating members of the public on any given day from the beginning of the stop to the end of the stop. So with that, I mentioned it, but I want to remind it that the data that's here is perceived data. So it's the officer's perception. Sometimes that can be wrong, right? So they may perceive someone as a certain race or a certain gender, and so they mark that in there. That may not be exactly what that person, how they identify necessarily. So the numbers are based on perceived data. Anyway, let's go to the next slide, please. Okay. So in 2022, there were 2,830 total RIPA stops, and in 2023, there were 2,808 stops. So fairly consistent between 2022 and 2023. Not as much to make of the monthly cycles yet. I'm hoping over time, like with anything, RIPA is relatively new, and so with each year, I'm hoping we can see more patterns, at least in terms of what our officers are doing, and if there's any gaps that we need to be filling in that regard. Next slide, please. Again, these are this is perceived race and ethnicity, fairly consistent from 22 to 23. I do want to touch on the fact, because I get this question sometimes, that regarding these numbers and say demographic overlay of the city, right? So that comes up a lot. Unfortunately, the demographic overlay doesn't necessarily offer us an accurate comparative data to efficiently give us answers as far as a direct cause and effect, and that's one piece of it. The second piece of it is, even though that's the case, I don't want to be dismissive of the fact that there may be something in here where we're looking to see if there's issues with our officers in the way that they conduct themselves, and are we seeing patterns that we can make of something of this. If you do some of the demographic data for Cotati versus the demographic data of, say, Sonoma County versus the demographic data of the Bay Area, there's a lot of different percentages that shift around, right? So if you look at the 9 Bay Area counties versus us versus Sonoma County, there's a lot of play in those percentages. So, as I've reminded folks, demographic overlay is one piece to look at. Some people say, well, they dismiss it. Don't look at the demographic overlay. I say, well, look at it, but it doesn't mean it's a direct cause and effect. It's still fuzzy math. And second of all, when you have where we are in Cotati, with the 116 and 101, as we all know, people are coming into the city from all over the place, right? So from Oakland, from San Francisco, from Santa Rosa, from even further than that out of the Bay Area. So again, it makes it a little more difficult to try to make sense of some of the numbers that we have. But again, I don't want to be dismissive of what the numbers may be telling us just because of that. So next slide, please. This is just regarding gender. Again, more males than females, about the same number as in those 2 years. Next slide. By age, age statistics here are in line with national averages, by the way. I would think that a lot of times populations, when you have colleges, like with Sonoma State or with SRJC, sometimes the numbers might be a little bit on the younger side. I don't necessarily see that here, so at least as far as RIPA data is telling us, it doesn't necessarily be the case. So in any event, next slide, please. All right, looking at the reason for the stop, it's obviously clear that the majority of stops are traffic stops, and that's really no surprise to most folks. And those who've actually been on the ride along, and I'll just put this out there, sometimes it's to be able to say, hey, well, you pulled this person over because of their race or their age or the gender. A lot of times our officers don't know who they're pulling over because they can't see who's actually driving the car. Now, that doesn't mean that that's the case all the time. So that's, again, I don't use that as a dismissive excuse. I use that as just in, you know, having been someone who's pulled over cars for years, a lot of times you don't know who you're pulling over. So that, again, looking at the numbers, it's a factor at least to consider. But again, of course, what matters most is the conduct of the officer during that stop and ensuring that the fair treatment, professional, empathic, again, how does the officer treat that person when stopped? Are they fair? Are they equitable? Are they compassionate? And that's the true marker of not only the legitimacy of the stop, but of the officer's intent to simply carry out his or her duties in the name of public safety. So again, I just want to, I don't mean to sound like I'm a broken record, but I want to reiterate that over and over again in terms of, you know, what we look at on the front end, but we especially look at during and after at the end of the stop too. Next slide. So looking at searches, of those 2,808 RIPA stops in 2023, 460 were searches. 16% of the stops resulted in a search. And one of the things that we get asked also, that I've been asked, is about consent searches. And do we do consent searches? And the answer is yes, we have done legal consent searches before. It's a variety across the board as far as how that happens. Sometimes the officer will ask for consent to search. Sometimes people will volunteer, hey, you can search me, I don't have anything on me. And so we see that as well too. And sometimes I've dealt with some pretty hardcore parolees or ex-parolees, I guess, that don't have a search clause anymore, but they're anxious to say, hey, I'm clean, you go ahead and search me. So anyway, there's sometimes you get that there's some agencies that say, well, we don't consent search, or there's some agencies that you can see their consent searches are really, 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 really high. So, I mean, to me, that's something that I would look into if I saw consent searches to be especially high, and see how our officers are being trained and how they're conducting themselves with the community. Next slide, please. So, looking at property seized, drugs. That's the punchline on this slide, right? So drugs, drug paraphernalia. The majority of what our officers are seeing on the streets and what they're searching or what they're seizing as evidence is drug related. Next slide, 2022, or slide 20, the duration of the stop. So 68% of the stops here are 4 to 14 minutes, which falls in line with the high percentage of traffic safety and enforcement stops that we do. 20 minutes has been the standard length for a traffic enforcement stop generally. So our stop durations here are actually a little shorter than the national averages. I think 20 sometimes is a little bit long, depending on how, you know, there's a whole host of different reasons why a stop could go a little bit longer, and if the radio's busy or just people are trying to get their paperwork and that sort of thing. So, but in any event, I don't see anything jumping off the page here in terms of the duration of the stops regarding RIPA. Next slide, please. So the results of the stop, we do a lot of traffic safety and education and issue a lot of warnings. And you know, we don't want to default to being punitive. We want people to drive safely, and that's the goal. So not just to issue citations all the time. So as you can see, we give a high number of warnings. This percentages has been, I mentioned, you know, verbal versus written here. They've been kind of compiled together. It's just all warnings, verbal and written, in this data point. I wanted to point out, so the term, I think we put field interview card complete. I get questions about what an FI or field interview card is. And really, we don't utilize them. Some agencies still use them. They were just like kind of like a little card that we would fill out if we had a contact with somebody, and we'd just fill out their name and some information about them. Hey, we saw them standing on this corner of the street and that sort of thing. And then that card would live in some record management system. It's kind of an archaic way of doing business now. If we contact someone, we'd either write a report or you know, we'd have some sort of incident that's put into the actual computer automated dispatch system, that sort of thing. And plus we have body worn cameras. So there's all different ways that this is recorded rather than just the way it used to be done. So it's still on there as a result of a stop in the RIPA data fields, but we don't use it. So next slide, please. So that's it for RIPA and the RIPA numbers. Move into the high-low siren drill. So we did this in 2023. We will do this again in 2024. The evacuation zones, especially correspond with our beat structure, essentially. It's more efficient in terms of operational and deployment purposes for our staff, and so they know those areas by heart just by virtue of the fact of the day-to-day business that they do, and that's great for them knowing and being able to react in an evacuation situation most efficiently. And we train for emergency preparedness. In fact, we have an emergency operations exercise scheduled, I think it's in June as well, so we'll be doing that. Next slide, please. So Civic Ready replaced Nixle, and I encourage everyone to sign up for that, and everyone in the community to sign up for that. DEA drug take back. So in 2023, we had at least over 70 pounds from the 2 events that were turned in. In fact, on this April 27th, from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. on Saturday at the Ray Miller Community Center, we have another drug take back. So a little plug for that. Encourage folks to bring their prescription medication that they're no longer using. Don't let it sit in the house, and bring it to us, and we'll dispose of it properly. Next slide, please. So just a note on the police policies that we use Lexipol. It is an industry standard. It's updated on the website and always accessible. Obviously, from a transparency standpoint, that's something that we want to make sure that we keep up to date. I think I've mentioned this to a number of people. I'm in the process of going through those policies. I come from a place that was not Lexipol, and it was all in-house policy. So there's good and bad to that. Looking at the Lexipol policy, obviously, as I mentioned, it's an industry standard, but at the same time, there's some generalizations associated with those policies that I think I want to make sure that when we're looking at our officers in our community and in Cotati, making sure that those fit for us. Yeah, do you have a question?
Yes, go ahead.
Lexipol is what they use here, but do you have the option of making changes to that here?
Yes.
You do? Okay.
Yep, absolutely, yeah. One of my concerns this is a learning curve for me regarding Lexipol, was that there was a lot of acrobatics involved in changing policy in Lexipol, and it's not the case. So the way it comes, and it's actually pretty nice the way they do it now, is they will come with suggestions based on new laws. So we get updated actually at a more universal level on new laws. So it reminds us that, oh wait, we didn't even know about this, so that's good to know. And then sometimes the laws are applicable, or sometimes their suggestions on how we should put our policy in place because of the law aren't necessarily how I think we should do business, to be quite frank. And so we'd obviously consult with an attorney too as well to make sure that we're not doing something that's, outside of the governances of that statute necessarily. But it can be even in smaller things, just the way that they say with use of force and certain equipment that they say, some equipment that they talk about we don't even use. So we take that out of our policy and that sort of thing. So I think overall Lexipol I think is a great tool for us to use and is a great structure for our policy. But if it's one of those things where you have to make sure that you're tailoring it to your agency so it makes sense to, just in terms of your day-to-day operations, not trying to tailor it out to, take out things that aren't otherwise important, right? But at the same time, it's just a matter of between the manager, the lieutenant, and myself going through that and reading that policy, and we can always change that policy. So if something comes up.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because I think some jurisdictions might say, no, we do whatever Lexipol says.
Right.
It may not be okay, or fit your community. So that's good that you're able to modify, make changes based on community. Thank you.
And we try to do it as a balance too. So it's not just, hey, we do whatever Lexipol says, and we also just don't say, hey, we do whatever we want. So somewhere in the middle is what we want to do to make sure we're doing the right balance in terms of our policy, both as just in terms of compliance with law, but also in terms of being an appropriate guideline for our people in terms of the culture that we want to push forward with our people in this community.
Okay, thank you.
The other piece of that on that same slide is regarding the SLI or SBSLI, so the Supervisory Leadership Institute. Sergeant Gaio, who's actually working for the Sheriff's Office now, attended last year, but we're looking forward to having Sergeant Wardle attend and go to this. It's a really good training. I've been through it years ago, but it's really good. It focuses a lot on accountability. It focuses a lot on making sure that you're an active and proactive supervisor, not just a passive supervisor, and it really gets folks thinking in that realm so they make that transition and are constantly thinking from a supervisor realm and looking out for the good of the officers, but also the what our true mission is for the service of our community. 25, next slide, please. So I won't go through all this, but the bottom line is that we go through a great deal of training, and every year there's more training that we add to it. And so we do everything that we possibly can to make sure that we're not only just doing the core training that's required of us by the Peace Officer Standards and Training, which is the state oversight body essentially out of Sacramento Post that you'll hear sometimes, that makes sure that we're going to the trainings that we are required to go to. But to the extent to which we can afford and that time allows, we send people to specialized training so they can be the best officers that they can be on the street. Next slide, please. Part of that is, so we have a recruit training officer, we have a sergeant, he's been there for a number of years now. He's a liaison in the academy. It's a huge benefit for us. It's works good for us getting updated training. It's a positive influence on the recruits entering the profession. It develops in a leader, and then that pays dividends back to us in terms of the way that he supervises, because he's someone who's aware of current trends, current law, current policy, et cetera, that sort of thing. Also on that slide is regarding ALPR, so Automated License Plate Reader Technology. And just like with RIPA, I'll go a little bit into that, just a little bit of context, and just because it's a bit of a hot button type of conversation that's happened in law enforcement over the last few years. So for us, a little bit of specific history. So we had what was called a Vigilant system. That's the vendor. But the Vigilant system was not operating from June 2023 to March of 2024. So it just, there was some compatibility issues with the computer software, and it just wasn't functioning. So the department did not have ALPR capabilities from June 2023 to March 2024, so almost a year. ALPRs that are back in use in the cars and for the cars. We have a 6-month retention policy, which means that any data that's collected on those ALPRs will only be for 6 months, and then it's purged from the system. So in terms of actual statistics, because the Vigilant system was down and our retention policy of 6 months, we don't forward really where we're going to see statistics is going forward. So I'm making sure I'm working with our records manager and with our officers and with our lieutenant to make sure that each month we're tracking of what we're taking from ALPR in terms of data collection, right? So I'll have information that comes from that. Talking about 2022 and 2023, what ALPR did get was there was 12 stolen vehicles in 2022, and in 2023 there was 4 stolen vehicles that were recovered that were credited from ALPR. One of the things I do want to mention about ALPR, so ALPR, the way that you program the system, we primarily restrict it to 3 main things, and there's dozens of check boxes you can do, so ALPR will start hitting off all sorts of different things. We've limited it to stolen vehicles and plates, wanted felony suspects and associated with vehicle and wanted vehicles, and missing persons, and that's it. So what we've considered to be main priorities for the ALPR system. ALPR basically does 2 things, or two functions that we use it from a policing standpoint. One is as an alert system, so when an officer's driving around and there is, say, a wanted vehicle or a stolen vehicle or a vehicle associated with a missing person, it will create an alert. And then that officer will then radio into dispatch and check on that plate. So they have to verify the plate to make sure that that's actually the case, in case so ALPR could have a false hit. That happens sometimes. And then dispatch will then relay whether that vehicle is still active as a wanted vehicle, and then the officer will take whatever appropriate enforcement action will happen during that stop. So that's one piece of ALPR. The second piece of ALPR is as an investigatory tool, where you can go back into it and then look and say, okay, well, I know that this plate is associated with something that happened 2 weeks ago in a burglary, and someone just called us and said, hey, we think this is a car, we saw this car, I was looking at my camera at home and I saw this car with this vehicle. Officer puts the plate in ALPR, and it can track any place where potentially an ALPR hit off of that plate. And you can kind of backtrack where the vehicle might have been, and if you then put in the date, or that vehicle, if it hits at that location, then that verifies that vehicle was there during that time period, if an ALPR was to hit during somewhere around that area, if that makes sense. So both as an activated alert and also an investigatory tool. In fact, we just had an incident that happened, the incident didn't happen, the incident happened in 2022. Today, our officer went down to San Mateo and picked up an individual, and I don't go into too much detail, it hasn't been adjudicated yet, but of a suspect who was wanted in a burglary, and they used ALPR technology back in 2022 to track down and use it as an investigatory tool, one of the plates and one of the vehicles that suspect was using. So that was actually part of an investigation that was used, post-incident with ALPR. So that's some of the benefits to that. The retention period, there is some debate about that. The industry standard, I say generally, is a year. Talking about Lexipol says a year. Ours is 6 months, so it's shorter. Some agencies have even shorter than that. They have it a few months. Most agencies are a year. Some agencies are 2, 3, 5 years. So it depends. Most are in between that kind of year mark, and generally, at least in the Bay Area. That's all I have really for ALPR right now. I don't know if there's any questions on that. We can just move on. Okay, next slide, please.
Yep,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
I just had a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Was there any charges during that time that the system was down? Did we get like adjustment or modification to that?
What do you mean in terms of?
The ALPR technology that was
Our
not available for.
I mean, were we still paying for it even though it was broken?
Right. Mhm.
I will have to look at that. I actually don't have an answer for you. I don't know about whether
Okay.
we were paying vigilant or not.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank
And I have a whole bunch of questions, but I was just going to save them all for the end.
Okay, all right,
So
great, perfect.
I might have a question
Perfect.
at the end too.
We'll power through then. Okay. All right, next slide, please. Okay, you got it on use of force, perfect, okay. So, looking at use of force, so again, back to that 11,217 number, that's how many events that we had. We had 30 use of force incidents. Move to the next slide, please. There you go. So when you look at it, we show 37 times that there was use of force was used, right? But we show 30 incidents. And just to clarify what that means is that you could have had an incident where you had one officer use one use of force and one officer use another use of force. So that's going to be 2 uses of force in one incident. So that's why you may have more uses of force than you do incidents or events, if that makes sense. So, but in the end, about 0.2% of the time our officers were required to use force. It's worth noting that many of the uses of force here listed are displays of force, so they're not actual physical force. So a display of a taser, for example. All 15 firearm displays resulted in arrests. The firearm display means that at any time that a firearm is removed from the holster in the field, the most common incident is a high-risk felony traffic stop, like a stolen vehicle or something like that. The officers are trained to at least have a officer who has lethal coverage. Other officers then, as part of that team, will have less lethal coverage as well. So just for an officer safety reason. Could be during a building search and then the suspect's contacted.
Yeah, just a quick question. Is there any like a difference between a firearm display and pointing a firearm at someone? Like if there had been an incident of someone pointing a firearm at someone, would that show up differently on this?
It wouldn't. No, we don't
Okay.
distill it down to that. So basically, if the firearm's removed from the holster, then we count that as a firearm display. So it could be pointed at the individual. It could be down at what we call a low ready position. It could be at the side, outside of the holster. So at different forms of readiness, the firearms we counted as a display.
Do you have any sense of what was the most common way for that to happen within these statistics?
I don't necessarily with these
Okay.
statistics. I can tell you anecdotally, at least in terms of my experience, that typically they're trained at low ready position, which is basically kind of, like a half down like that, not actually pointed in directions. So in the tragic event, if there was somehow an accidental discharge or something, it wouldn't hit that person. The only time that they should be going up, actually pointing it at that individual, is if they think there's an imminent threat.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. So these are mainly the use of force defined. So we have some definitions here regarding the different types of tools that we have and to just correspond with the techniques that were used on the previous slide. Next slide, please. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I also have a long list, but this is a quick one. So this one was just confusing to me. I get that every use of force resulted in an arrest, but if there was no combative or uncooperative, why was force used at all?
So it's combative or uncooperative 5150 subject, and we should probably clarify what that. So basically, last year there was. I guess there was some sort of question, and I can't answer, to be honest with you, about the historical of this, but this was put as a data point, I think in question about how many uncooperative or combative mental health subjects did you have to use force for? And so in 2023, there was none. So it wasn't that there wasn't a combative or uncooperative subjects, but they just weren't mental health related or deemed 5150 mental health related
Okay.
combative. Does that make sense?
Right. So there are no, I mean, I guess I'm looking for use of force by reason, and I'm not seeing any reasons that those 30 took place.
Right. So, okay. So you're talking about.
Well, I'm just saying there were 30 incidents, but there are 0 reasons.
Yeah, so we'd have to go through each report of those 30 reports of those 30 events to find out, to give you the reason that whatever version of force was used. For example, was the person resisting arrest? Were they fighting with the officers? There was incidents I know where they had displayed a knife, so someone displayed a firearm, someone displayed a taser, that sort of thing. So
Right.
That's not captured in any of this data. But yeah, the combative or uncooperative 5150 was just limited to someone that was 5150 / mental health. And
Okay.
that was from a previous year data point that was put on there, and I see where that's confusing, because I mean they're all 0, so it may be worth taking out unless there's something that's worth noting. Why that particular piece was there, I think, was probably because of some sensitivity to officers using force on those that are suffering from mental health crisis. Does that make sense?
Right. And that's great to see that, but I personally would really like to see what the reason was for those 30. You know, just maybe, next time that we do this, to have that actually spelled out would be really important.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Great. Was there another question? I'm sorry. No? Okay, great. Next slide, please. So Assembly Bill 481, this is basically regarding military equipment, or what's been categorized as military equipment, and the reporting that we are required to do as a result of that. The 2 pieces of equipment that we have that fall under that definition is the command vehicle that we have, and also the beanbag shotgun. So the command vehicle was not utilized in 2023. In fact, this vehicle is probably toward its end of life, and probably something that we need to be considering and looking. I'm looking at other potential grant opportunities and that sort of thing, where we can get an updated vehicle that will be helpful from a mutual aid standpoint. And that's what it's been used for, especially with the small agencies. But right now, or at least in 2023, it was not used, and we haven't used it since then. Regarding the beanbag shotgun, so we had a beanbag shotgun display that was not, it was our equipment, but it was utilized by a Sonoma State officer. And this was during an incident with a subject with a knife. And essentially our officers and Sonoma State were working together, and were putting together an arrest team to deal with this situation. And one of the officers was given the equipment that we have. Now, normally I don't like to have our equipment being used by another officer, so that's something that we'll be training our people not to have that happen again. However, I will say sometimes in a crisis situation, you do what you can to do what you can. So they wanted to have a less lethal option that was available on top of a taser option, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing to have when you're dealing with and confronting somebody with a knife. So they elected to have that SSU officer, who was trained on this, by the way. So it wasn't like they were handing him a piece of equipment that they weren't trained on. Now, these pieces of equipment, and probably for a different conversation, but they may, I think there's other pieces of equipment that are probably better for less lethal options than a shotgun that was a lethal weapon that's been basically the stock and the forend were changed to make it less lethal. It can still fire lethal rounds, and I don't like combining those 2 things together. So just as a piece of equipment in terms of the safety and tactically, where I'm looking into other options besides having an actual lethal piece of weaponry that was just kind of converted down, because there's some hazards, obviously hazards to that. Next slide, please. So part of our commitment to the community outreach and is interaction with folks is our neighborhood beat meetings that we have for the officers that we do. We have it for the 6 different beats. We'll be doing it this year as well. So what we're going to try to do is in addition to leveraging social media and trying to get the word out there, doing everything we can to get to up the folks' interest in this, because I think it really does allow people to interact with the officers and kind of get the feel for what we do policing wise, and just in terms of knowing what the different community needs are in those different areas. I mean, we segmented these out. There's obviously a lot of commonalities with the different neighborhoods and the needs that people have and the requests they have of the police, but a lot of times it's underattended, quite frankly, and so I want to try to up the attendance in that going forward.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is one of the ones I wrote down before we came, which is how they're publicized, and I wonder, because I've been interested to attend and have never been able to figure out when they are. So I'm wondering, I heard you say social media. Does it potentially go in the water bill too, or like is there another place that it could be publicized so people know?
Yeah, so yeah, primarily it's been through the police department Instagram. Every aspect of with what the city uses, whether that's the water bill, whether that's the city website, whether that's the marquee, whether that's everything that we can do to push out that, I think, to everybody is what, at the bare minimum, I want to do, and then maybe even look at other options where I can get out there even with businesses and with other neighborhoods and just proactively over the course of this year, just kind of get face to face with people and talk to, our faith-based folks around here or any advocacy groups or that would be interested, that kind of spread that word and kind of be a force multiplier in terms of getting that word out.
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to offer too is I know I did see something that it just said beat whatever neighborhood meeting, and I don't know what beat I lived in. And so I would just offer that whenever that kind of word goes out, that it please include a map. Mm-hmm. This map is great and it makes it very clear which beat I live in, but the message that I saw didn't specify, and so I didn't know. So I just thought, for the public, that could be helpful.
Yeah, if we can include a visual and even include the map, it's probably the easiest way to do it. Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, next slide.
These are back in person now, right?
They were in Zoom.
They're still Zoom.
Yep.
Well, that might explain your under attendance.
Yeah, and so there's some back and forth conversation about that, whether, if we do it in person, will we get more attendance, or will people be even less likely because it's, potentially more inconvenient for them rather than being in Zoom. So again, to go back and forth, but one suggestion, and probably the one that I like the most, is both, right? So if we could do it in person and have a Zoom component to it, just like we do, if we can work that out in some way, shape, or form, I think that would be, at least we're trying to kill 2 birds with 1 stone in that regard, and hopefully up it. All right. Our electric vehicle fleet, so as most folks know, so we have 4 EV vehicles, and we have 1 on the way. So we have 2 Tesla Y, 2 Mach-E, and then 1 Ford Lightning, which is basically a K9 vehicle, which is being outfitted right now. So we're at 5 EV vehicles, 4 and almost 5 EV vehicles. So that's a really good thing, and hopefully we can move forward with more EV vehicles. There are some challenges with EV vehicles right now, at least in terms of from a policing standpoint, so you're aware. Things like ballistics and things like putting some of the emergency capabilities in those vehicles and that sort of thing. So we're working through that, but sometimes it can delay a little bit of the outfitting and trying to get some specialized outfitting that's good for the safety of the officers. Next slide. Without going into all this, this is an overview of what constitutes our primary service function in terms of policing. The photo is of a stolen vehicle where they arrested a couple of folks, but just a lot of the different policing functions that we have, and investigative functions that we do, and the community-oriented policing functions that we do, and that sort of thing. So, next slide. Animal control. These are photos of animals that have been located and currently up for adoption. So we obviously advocate for microchipping your animal, but we do have an animal control function and work in partnership with Buena Park Animal Services as well. Next slide. So we have our own dispatch center, and that's for Cotati and working with Sonoma State as well. So we're a PSAP, a public safety answering point for Cotati and for Sonoma State. And we love our dispatchers. In fact, last week was Dispatch Appreciation Week last week. Next slide. We also love our canine team. So this is just some information about Dolly and Dolly's handler, Officer Sullivan. If you go to the next slide, then you get a bunch of photo swag right there that you can see with Dolly and a bunch of ahs and oohs. And the lower right corner is Dolly with retired canine Remo. So Remo was an apprehension canine, and he's now retired and enjoying life. And Dolly actually was just used the other day in tracking down the area of a location where I believe a suspect was involved in an incident that happened in Healdsburg. So there's Dolly's being used kind of throughout the county, and is a good mutual aid resource, not only just for Cotati, for everyone else. So it's getting good experience. Next slide. We have cadets and volunteers. Currently we have 3 cadets and 6 volunteers. We also have Sonoma State interns that will ride along with us as well. So these are great opportunities for young folks to be involved and get involved with our agency, and it's good for our agency to be reaching out, especially from those folks that are in the intern program at Sonoma State, because those will be our next generation of police officer men and women. So next slide. So the next few slides are just about the partnerships that we have, and again, I can't say enough that we rely on our community and depend on our community and want to do everything we can to make sure that we're doing outreach to our community, whether that's from a social media standpoint, as mentioned earlier, or getting out there with these events. And all these events are really important, but I also want to add that I don't think they're a substitute to just getting out on any given day and interacting with people, and so not waiting for an event to happen in order to actually start talking to the community. So I know that I get out there as much as I can, and I'm training the officers, and the officers get out there as much as they can beyond just doing policing, but actually just interact with folks and ask them how they're doing and what their needs might be. Next slide. Again, I just want to invite you to follow us on our social media platforms, Instagram and Facebook, and also go through the city website and cruise around and get to know us a little better. And always, I encourage folks to reach out to our officers and reach out to me as well. My information is out there. Shoot me an email, and I'm happy to have a conversation. So, next slide. This is a series of commendations. We put these in the report just to highlight the great work that our officers are doing. Where we're helping people, saving lives, whether in some cases, if you go to the next slide, there's some commendations regarding, unfortunately we had a homicide here, but there was some really great work that was done to make sure that a suspect was taken into custody as quickly as possible. And a lot of folks did a lot of good work, both on the front end in the field and also in the investigative piece of that as well. Next slide. Just by definition, so meritorious conduct is a special chief's commendation, but it's essentially a commendation as well, but it was from the chief at the time who did basically an extra commendation on top of it. Also on there is the MAD award. So that's for recognizing that Officer Sullivan had over 25 DUI arrests in 2023, which is the top achievement for MAD. So that's, again, we were doing, as mentioned, a lot of DUI enforcement. Next slide. So wanted to include this just as a snapshot. We're already putting together the annual report for 2024 slowly, just kind of adding and populating, so we have a good framework and we're as efficient as possible and can get it to you as soon as possible, as close to the beginning of the year each year. But as mentioned, we continue to focus on equity and inclusion and accountability, targeting specific public safety needs, again, traffic, pedestrian, drugs, any sort of trafficking, emergency preparedness, de-escalation, implicit bias training. I know that we're going to have a conversation here shortly about potential oversight and what that looks like. And so That's obviously the top of the list for this year. Continuing to work with our safety and collaboration, again, with our mental health and unhoused population, with that kind of collaboration is absolutely critical. And then, even most importantly, you know, we have a records analyst, Michael Cowan, who's done a really, really good job in getting data together. It's a new position, new assignment for him. And so enhanced data analytics and records training is really important, because I think that accurate data really translates to what are we really doing? Like, part of transparency is about getting accurate data, and sometimes data is just thrown out there and it says, hey, here's the data, here's some numbers, have a nice day. But really, what does it mean, and what can we take from it, and what can we do positively in the organization? So it starts with good data. So good data in, good data out, like anything else. So that's a key thing for me, especially. Working with our folks to make sure that we're giving you that data as quickly as possible, as efficiently as possible. And some of it can be very challenging, and deciphering some of that. RIPA is one of those things. But in any event, trying to do the best we can with that. Next slide. So that's all I have, and I sense that there may be some questions.
Okay, thank you very much for that comprehensive report. I really appreciate it. Why don't we start off on this side and just work our way down? Yeah.
First off, Chief Simmons, just thank you for all the detailed information, and that you really were able to also explain over and above what's in the report to kind of explain some other things that, you know, we need to understand. So thank you for that. I did have a few questions. Let's see. Okay, so you already answered a couple of them. The one, well, I think I asked you one previously. Oh, I saw that you had on your organizational chart that you have a dispatch position open.
That's correct.
And do you have bilingual dispatchers?
I'm sorry, do I
currently?
what?
Bilingual dispatchers currently?
Yes, we do.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I wasn't sure. 'Cause I was going to say maybe you can fill it with some more bilingual staff. that
Oh, I
can-
hope to. Yeah,
they can
trust
do
me.
both languages, or
Yeah,
languages
yeah.
that's needed. Okay. I think that's a question that I had for now. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any questions?
So on this stats for the SAFE team, it said that there was 327 calls, which kind of seems a little bit low for a 24/7, 365. I know we share with Roanoke Park and SSU, but I just was curious as to whether they're being fully utilized, since it looks like most of what they're doing is calls for dispatch, but very little in work on their own. So I was just curious if you had any insight into that.
Yeah, and I can only speak generally in terms of, you know, I don't know their inside operations necessarily, but I know that they are around for self-initiated activities as well. So they are here. I think they just get dispatched a lot more than before they even, you know, see some sort of issue. Now there's Sonoma State Cotati is one of the, you know, vans essentially. Then you have Roanoke Park, you have Petaluma, and they actually have one in San Rafael as well. So, and so I think part of that is probably staffing, but I think that they are a 24/7, and that's very recent though too. So that was, I think, only within, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was only
Been
the
a
last
while.
couple of months that they went 24/7. Has it been longer than that?
Yeah.
Oh, it has been. Okay, all right. Yeah.
I mean,
so-
because that's less than one call a day.
yeah.
And so then I'm also then not seeing the self-initiated. Because at, you know, less than one call a day, we are expending a lot of resource for that. And it could be, I guess maybe it would be helpful to see in addition to our stats, the other stats, maybe Roanoke Park is utilizing it and we're not getting, you know, we're not getting as much because their numbers are higher. But that just kind of struck me for what we were doing, because I know you guys answer more than one call a day.
Yes, we do.
So, yeah.
It works out to be, just so you know, it's like, it's about 82% Roanoke Park calls.
Okay.
And about 12% Cotati, and then what is that, 6% SSU, something like that?
Okay.
If you look at the way they're billed, that's about right too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just, can I do a follow-up to your
Yeah,
question?
that's helpful.
Maybe it would be useful to see what the breakdown is between dispatched versus self-initiated responses in Roanoke Park.
It's pretty much the same.
Pretty much the same?
Yeah,
Okay.
they're primarily dispatched to things. They do some self-initiated, but it's a relatively small amount compared to the dispatched calls.
Okay, I just thought that that would be helpful because it seemed like
Yeah.
the numbers just seem low for what we're, what we're investing in it. And then on the ALPR stuff, it was interesting because I've been to a couple of different things where they've had, in particular, groups down in the Los Angeles area where they're working together to utilize that, and they're saying that they're seeing a lot more traveling from Southern California to the Bay Area. Just tons of it. We happen to be on the 101, so we kind of are an easy target, if you will, because we're able to get in and out. Have you at all had requests from other agencies? Because what they were talking about, for instance, one of the things that they talked about was an 8-year-old that was kidnapped, and they were kidnapped in Southern California, and they were trying desperately to find that child. And like 6 days later, the license plate popped up in the Bay Area, and they were actually able to find location and retrieve the child. But they are seeing a lot more. As they said, it's only 8 hours, and they're seeing a lot of that with the theft stuff, because the thefts are either happening up here and then they're selling the merchandise down in Southern California, or they're doing thefts in Southern California and selling the merchandise up here. So
Yeah, I can tell you that's absolutely the case, and we work with other agencies all the time with this sort of data, yeah.
okay. And then we had a constituent come tonight and actually give Ben a note on speeding on Charles Street, and I know that's been a problem on and off forever. We do have the one hub. Have we at all lately put the speed trailer out? I know sometimes I see it and then I don't see it for like a long time. Is it still working? I know sometimes it it hiccups.
I will check the status of the speed trailer, because I don't want to speak out of turn on that. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'll
Okay,
find that out right now.
because that might be an option for, it gets people's attention at least. So
Absolutely.
those are all my questions right now.
All right, thank you.
But I'm happy to jump in.
Well, I was just going right to left, but
Oh, I see.
we can
Okay,
do whatever
okay.
you like.
No. On the safe question, and that seemed like a low number to me. I was surprised it was that low, service in Cotati. I know they had trouble generating that data for a long time. Like, they couldn't tell us when they were responding in what city. So I hope they're getting that right. I'm not sure if they know when they're in Cotati and when they're in Roanoke Park. And, as you drive down East Cotati, it's hard to tell. But I wonder so first of all, I think when they're not on a call, they're supposed to be doing outreach to unhoused people and things like that, right? And that primarily takes place in Roanoke Park, I believe, but given current populations. So, and I'm not sure if that shows up as self-initiated activity in this kind of report, or if this data is only what counts as a call or something. I'm not sure. So
It would show up as self-initiated.
okay,
They
and
log it.
you're saying there's basically none of that in Roanoke Park either. It's all dispatch.
Well, relative to the dispatch numbers. I mean, there's definitely self-initiated, but I don't have the exact numbers.
So
but-
most of their time is taken up with calls now.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. And I wonder if there's any potential for more calls to be dispatched to SAFE versus police, and if you've looked at, percentage in our city compared to other cities that are because there's more and more of this type of model around, even, or look at long-term data from Eugene or something like that. What percentage of calls are they sending to SAFE or to their version of SAFE? And are there, could we look at whether our criteria for sending to SAFE could be changed a little to utilize SAFE a little better? I don't know if you've looked at that at all.
And I'll just speak to that briefly, because we're just having this discussion with dispatch and ways that we can utilize SAFE, just like you said, in any way that we possibly can that doesn't involve law enforcement. We just want to be, we have to skirt that line real carefully, because we don't want to send them into a situation that otherwise could be potentially dangerous.
Yeah,
and
of
at the
course.
same time, we don't want to, go to a situation where otherwise we wouldn't even be needed. So
Right.
finding that balance, I think, is always kind of important. And going, you have to go by what the call is,
Right.
what you know at the time, right? So whatever the call taker says, even though it may not end up being that, it
Right.
could it could go south one way or the other. But yeah, definitely, anytime, I mean, any criticism about law enforcement being in the mental health business and shouldn't be in the mental health business, I can't agree more, right? And so any time that there's an opportunity to have a non-law enforcement response to someone who's in mental health crisis, then we definitely need to be utilizing the safe team for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
Just a follow-on to that, I'm remembering when we were first organizing SAFE before we even got off the ground, we had the consultant from Eugene who helped to set up the program come speak with us.
Cahoots, yeah.
And I think I remember him talking about that over time, their experience in Eugene was that the dispatch would be pretty conservative at first, and that over time they started to iteratively learn like what kinds of calls it was safe to send safe out to send cahoots out to alone, and that started to go up. So I'd be interested to see if we, now that we have a baseline, if we can start to learn, when is it okay to send without officers and do more of that.
Absolutely, and I can say just in talking with our dispatchers that they're definitely comfortable with calling safe. We call safe any opportunity that we have and try to utilize them any chance that we can, because I think it's just important to have those professionals there readily available for us. Even if we are going to that scene and if we can have safe even stage in a certain area once that scene is then safe, and having them come in and be part of that interaction with that individual is really beneficial.
And just a final comment on those lines. I can imagine there are edge cases where the issue might be a substance abuse issue, not a mental health issue. You could either send a police response to that or somebody who's got treatment resources and can get them to treatment. I hope we err on the side of getting them to treatment rather than pursuing it as an enforcement option. But that's the kind of thing I'm getting at when I talk about
absolutely.
moving the bar.
Yeah.
I was wondering, I still struggle to understand pretextual stops and the what's allowed, what's not. So here's a scenario. Up in industrial zone, 11 at night, we don't really expect to see people there. Say there's a car driving slowly around, and our officer is out there patrolling. I can understand the officers wondering, what's this car doing out here, casing the neighborhood? So I believe it's a pretextual stop if the officer then decides to follow at a distance this car for a while, wait to see if there's a brake light out, or to see if there's, and is that a legit stop, or is that a prohibited pretextual stop?
So in that scenario, again, there's a bunch of different factors, but I mean, if even that, take the piece of that out of it where the car has some sort of malfunction or whatever, some violation, right? If there's enough articulable facts for reasonable suspicion for that officer to stop that car because they believe that they're casing that, and there's a whole series of facts that would have to come into play for that to be. It's not just this hunch like, oh, I see a car, it's 11 o'clock at night and it's in a business district, so I can go ahead and stop it on reasonable suspicion. That's not going to be the case necessarily. But again, if they see anytime you see a traffic violation and they make the stop and they want to make the stop, that's going to be a legal justification for the stop, right? So if they're then talking to that individual and they see burglary tools in the back of the car or something like that, then that's further reasonable suspicion to your point about that they would potentially be casing and that sort of thing. So I don't know if I'm answering your question necessarily, but.
Well, I mean, this is perhaps impossible to get at, but if there's no violation evident at the time, but it's a crummy car and I don't think that person probably belongs here, so I'm going to hang out and watch and see if they roll through a stop sign. So the rolling through the stop sign isn't the real reason for the stop. Does that make it I'm just trying to get at sort of what the guidelines are.
Sure. And again, like I mentioned before, the operational definition of pretext has shifted depending on who you're talking to, even amongst the RIPA board members. So the way I maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but I simplify it for them in terms of if there's no law violation, then you don't have a stop, period. And so.
No, I get that.
What you're asking then is in the forefront of the officer's mind, why is the officer stopping this car, right? then the question comes up, well, okay, if it's legal, if there's a legal justification for the stop, then the officer has the legal right to make the stop, right? And so that's basically where it ends. And then so the rest becomes kind of this subjective conversation about what was the officer thinking at the time, right? And, you know, and then the question is, does that matter from a legal standpoint, right? To me, it matters, at least in terms of the officer's thought process and what they're trying to do, because the store owner who has, you know, some sort of business that's in that district and sees some car, you know, driving around and they've been hit 3 times, and the officer says, oh, well, I don't see any law violations, I'm not going to wait for one, I'm going to leave, and then they end up burglarizing the place. That store owner's going to have something to say about it, right? So I think it's about the balance of that. But to me, to the question of, do your officers do pretext stop, in the sense that from a legal standpoint where you're just doing investigative hunches, the answer is no, we don't do pretext stops, because those aren't lawful stops, right? If you define it as, well, okay, you're going to do a legal stop, but really the officer had some inkling that maybe this car was, you know, could have been involved in something, then yeah, that can happen at any time. And I don't think you can necessarily remove an officer's frame of mind of thinking from an investigative standpoint. Generally, I don't think we'd want that from our officers, if that makes sense either. So that's, I don't know if I just made it clear as mud for you, or more gray, or,
Well,
you
it
know.
just, those sorts of, you know, look for a taillight that's out so you can stop somebody because you got a hunch.
Right.
That's what I would call a pretextual stop. You're using
Right.
the taillight as a pretext to stop them for another reason.
So for me, in terms of the training of our officers, they'd need more than that. In terms of, from the hunch standpoint, if that's their reason for the stop. Now, again, I can't argue if they say, hey, well, I stopped the car because he ran a stop sign, then that's the case. And if the officer's being honest and says, hey, I stopped that car because he stopped the stop sign, period, end of discussion, then okay, then he did a legal lawful stop. If the officer said, hey, you know, I just, you know, it was a kind of a crummy car in kind of a bad neighborhood. Yeah, I was just kind of hanging out until he ran the stop sign, and then I got him for the stop sign, but I really was just still, you know, so that's not the kind of enforcement that I want the officers here to be doing in that regard. But I don't want them to be black and white in terms of the way that they just say, well, you know, I'm gonna pretend I don't see this car at 3 a.m. driving, you know, through at a low speed in a business district, going in a place that they don't belong in, and parking and stopping and turning off their lights. Because I want, you know, officers to be able to think about those are the things that happen historically, and in you know, there's legal justification, and there's for developing reasonable suspicion for criminal activity in that regard too. So I don't want to take that away from them as well.
Yeah, great. That's really helpful. Thanks. I was happy to see such a small number of consent-given searches, and I appreciate the examples of, hey, just take a look, I'm clean.
Right.
That's helpful. Why would an officer ever say, like, ever ask for consent if there's not another reason to perform the search?
Well, sometimes it could be from a safety reason, right? So now they may have articulable facts going back to that, as far as, well, he's wearing a heavy jacket and it's July and he keeps making furtive movements when I'm talking to him, so he could have a weapon, those sorts of things. And so there's that. And say, hey, do you have anything on you? No, I don't have anything on me. Hey, do you mind if I just search you to make sure you don't have anything on you? Hey, yeah, sure, no problem, right? And then, so that could be an example. Another example is, you know, we talked about a lot of drug use, so someone that they may be acting a certain way, right? Maybe under the influence, and so they may not have necessarily enough to arrest that person for being under the influence, right? 11550 is the health and safety violation that they would necessarily be, so they have to do a series of tests for that to confirm that. But if they sense somebody as, hey, do you have any drugs on you right now? Or do you have any needles or anything like that? Is there anything that's going to hurt me? Do you mind if I search you real quick? You know, that's a scenario at least.
Thanks, those are helpful. So I think about this every time I hear about the drug take back, the prescription, you know. So suppose a parent finds a stash of a non-prescription drug and they want it out of the house. What are they supposed to do other than turning their kid in?
Well, they can call us to dispose of.
Okay.
We can take it as found property.
That is possible. Yeah. Okay, interesting. And that was not asked from personal information, by the way.
Sorry, I didn't catch your address.
So I love that we have a recruit training officer at the academy. How is that, does that person do that work as part of their job with us? Or is that a second job? Or do they buy out, does SRGC buy out some of his time from us?
Yeah, no, so he basically does it on his off time and as part of that, and then he's paid through the academy.
A second job.
Yeah, like a contract job.
Okay, thanks.
Councilmember Rivers.
Okay, so I'm going to start page 5. I just noticed it looks to me, and I could, these names may be not as male as they appear, but it looks like the top 3 levels are all men. And so I just wanted to bring to the attention, it looks like there's 2 vacancies at corporal, and I just would like to encourage, if it's appropriate, to consider promoting any of the, BIPOC, Spanish-speaking women up into those positions, because it really does look like there's no women in positions of influence.
Absolutely.
In the entire station.
Absolutely.
And then for the, I know the overlay is not, on page 18 with the, 76% of Katati is white, but only 54% are being stopped. And the black population is 0.9, but that's 6%, and that's consistent over the last couple of years. And then the Latino is only 11%, but it's 31% of the stops. So I'm heartened to see that we have this records analyst now. I think that's really great. And I was also heartened to hear you say that this oversight committee is something that's happening this year, and would very much, I just don't want to have this conversation again. I mean, you weren't even here last time, but this is the second time at least that I've been involved. And I know that, the council has been talking about getting a, we did have a police review board, a citizens review board, just to revitalize that, to bring that back as potentially, what data would be fair, and how we're going to come to that, and what the citizenry of Katati wants to know, and I would very much like to, just maybe have some status updates on where we are with that, and hopefully have it, in place and have a report from them the next time we meet, right?
Yep.
Actually, I think those were the main things. The rest of the questions I had, I asked during the time. Oh, the one other comment I wanted to make, I heard you make a comment about how what happens after the stop is what really matters, and I agree that that is super important. But for, specifically people of color, the stop itself can be super terrifying. And so I just want to, and we don't have statistics. Well, we have some statistics about what happened after, but not statistics on why force was used. So I feel like the statistics that we have are who was stopped, right? And so I just want to draw attention to the idea that the experience of being stopped is not the same for all of the people in our demographics. And I just wanted to bring attention to that, because I know that's not what you meant, but I just heard that and it kind of, caused me to have to say something.
Yeah, no, and to clarify, what I meant was basically from the beginning of the stop to the end of the stop, and
Right.
the totality of that stop from beginning to end, and how someone can experience it, to your point, at any moment during that stop, from the moment that they're being stopped by the police to the very end of when the police leave, at any moment and multiple moments during that time period can definitely be experienced as a traumatic incident, or just the perception of the police, and every second of that can be quite scary.
Right, and before, right? Like being stopped itself, regardless of how incredible the police is, can be super traumatic.
Right, or even not being stopped at all, and just the perception of the police and the way that just walking down the street and seeing a police car and that sort of
Exactly.
thing. So being sensitive to that as well.
Right. So, I mean, and I feel like that's why I was asking more about how these sort of meetings were publicized, because I feel like the more people get to know the officers as human beings, the less, the more that can dissipate.
It's one of the big goals that I have for this year, is just kind of trying to bring the humanistic aspect of the men and women in our department that do a really, really good job, that they're also just people trying to do a good job too. So making
Right.
sure the community has that recognition, and then that our people also are recognizing members of the community as people that want to work with them too. So
Right. So one just last thing that I would offer is, outreach, participating in things like Cinco de Mayo, like, Juneteenth, right? Like just, the actual ethnic, BIPOC groupings, right? Even, like the Petaluma Blacks for Economic Development, these kind of picnics and events and festivals, whatever of those we as an organization can be at, or that our police can be at, I think the better.
yeah, anything that's not necessarily a police function is
Right.
a good place for them to be, I think, a lot of times.
Right. But specifically, Pride Parade, like just,
We're going.
but I mean, just anything that's outside of the WASP, right? I think is really important for our police to be at.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Sure, one more question? Yeah.
No, it's just really hard to get to know somebody as a human over Zoom. So
Yeah. Point noted. And
A quick plug for Cinco de Mayo in Roseland. That'd be a good place
Okay.
to meet a lot of people on May 5th, Sunday.
Okay, I had some questions too. I'm gonna, not too many, actually a lot of them got addressed, but I'm gonna start just page by page on the report.
please.
So the earliest one was on page 9 about the complaints. So this is packet page 122. I just had a question about how things get categorized as unfounded versus some of these other descriptions, because one of your, and I really appreciated you sharing the a little more info about the complaints. That was really helpful. But one of the complaints was that an officer's tone was perceived to be rude. And you yourself kind of pointed out, like, people have different perceptions of an encounter. So it seems to me like if several people looked at that and they didn't seem rude, that maybe that would be not sustained or exonerated, because the unfounded makes it sound like, oh, this just, and the way Chief Parrish used to explain unfounded to us was you'd review the body camera footage and it just literally didn't happen. So it seems like if I'm perceiving you as rude, it's hard to say this is objectively not true.
Yeah,
that you're rude,
I think that part of the reason that happened here was because the complainant once, I don't know if they were, I want to speak out of turn, I don't know if they were shown the body cam footage or what, but when the officer circled back to the complainant, they said, okay, well, never mind, it's all good kind of thing. So I don't know, and again, I'm paraphrasing, I don't know the details of necessarily what the complainant said exactly back at the end of that. So, and again, to your point, yeah, maybe going forward, something like a not sustained makes more sense. Or at least acknowledges something where perception may play more of a part rather than just saying something is factually not true.
Yeah, because it makes it seem like people are coming with these just totally bad faith complaints that just literally are not in any way true. But it sounds like, well,
Sometimes
they
that
really
happens,
perceived
too.
it as a real problem.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Okay, and then next question was on page 13. Which was packet page 126. I just had a question if you had any idea why the stops dropped so precipitously during the summer of 2022 and then had this very steady ramp up. Was that something to do with the way the data was being collected, or
I don't know.
any idea?
No,
Okay.
I really don't have an idea as to why that happened, and I'm hoping, what's that?
I was going to say quarantine.
Well, 2022 seems a little late.
Yeah, I mean, the same thing with, if you look at December that dropped down, I mean, so
Yeah.
There's a lot of reasons, you know, that potentially something could be not reported as a RIPA stop. You know, so I actually have a whole list of those, but I don't know if that's even necessarily the reason why. We'd have to go through each one to find out, you know, that's just going to tell us what stop. We'd have to go through every single report that we ever wrote and see if for some reason, was there an underreporting, or was there some other reason that was going on where they just didn't stop as many people during that time period, which happens too. Sometimes there's ebbs and flows in terms of just, you know, calls for service.
And
that sort
I
of
realize it's asking a lot of you to tell us what was going on in 2022 when you were in a different county. So I'm sure as we go forward, if we see little blips like this, you'll probably have a better idea what was going on.
Yeah, I don't have any personal knowledge on what was necessarily happening at that point in time, but I can tell you, you know, there's, you know, and maybe it's worth mentioning. So there's a lot of other reasons, and it may not speak to this question necessarily, but there's because I was looking at some of the data in terms of, you know, how many stops and things that we had, contacts and interactions versus the number of RIPA stops, right? And do those correlate at least fairly, you know, in a general sense? And so when the numbers got really tight here, and I say tight, but at least we're close, and I said, okay, was there underreporting going on or something like that? So I'm doing my own auditing to make sure that that's not happening. And in that, found a number of different situations where there were things that were stops that were reported as for example, like how many traffic stops did we do in the year? And I said, okay, well, that seems like, you know, maybe some underreporting on the RIPA stops, because every traffic stop should be a RIPA stop, right? I mean, because it is a stop, it's a detention. But when you look at some of the other stops, the things that are coded out, this is about data again, as stops, a lot of times when there's bicycle stops that aren't really stops, but they're just consensual encounters, and over the air, the officer will say, hey, I'm out with a bicyclist, and the dispatcher will put bicycle stop, right? And then that ends up being a stop, right? But it's not a RIPA stop because there's no detention and no search, so it's not logged as one. And so, oh, you're underreporting. Well, no, actually, it was just the way it was coded. So there's about a dozen of those types of little things that the way things are coded, and so I'm trying to do two things to try to clean that up better. And one is the way in which the dispatchers are putting in that data, and two is the way in which the officers are reporting out that data verbally too. So we get cleaner data that way, so it's not we're not either cross-pollinating on something that we shouldn't, or underreporting on something, or at least there's a perception that is happening as well. So going forward, and I hope in addition to having, you know, each year we get a little more data that we can build off of too as well.
Thank you so much, and I know it's going to be a learning experience as we go forward. Next one was on page 21, which is packet page 134. I just had a question. I didn't understand the difference between in-field cite and release and citation for infraction. So it seemed like we kind of flipped the percentages, changed the percentages a lot on those between 2022 and 2023. I'm wondering, like it went from 16% down to 4% for in-field cite and release, and then from 12% up to 23%. I just wondered what is the difference between those two things? And
I'm sorry, I'm looking at what slide number was that?
Sorry, it was slide number 21. Yeah.
Okay. And so your question was about infield cite and release versus?
But citation for infraction. Mm-hmm. And what's the difference between those? And did we just start reporting them differently, or was there some substantial change in what was happening?
Yeah, so as far as the actual change in the number itself, I don't know, but I can tell you, so infield cite and release again could be, these are RIPA, this is their terminology that we have to fall into. So things like when I was talking about like a warrant cite and release, that could be an infield cite and release, but it could also be something where I could be arresting you, do a technical arrest to you, and I 849 you, I release you at the scene, right? So like a citizen's arrest, someone says, I want to arrest that person for petty theft, right? But it was a misdemeanor not committed in that officer's presence. They sign a citizen's arrest form, but then we cite release them at the scene rather than taking them actually to county jail. So that would be an infield cite and release. I don't know that we're doing anything differently, and I can inquire about that if for some reason we changed the way that we were fielding that data or inputting that data for these data fields between 2022 and 2023. But yeah, there's a number of different scenarios. Citing for infraction, and that's just specific to an infraction. So that seems like that would be obviously from, majority of those are gonna be from traffic stops, right? But the other one, infield cite and release, could be any number of different type of stops or some sort of, you could have a traffic stop, but it's also the driver has a warrant, but you cite release them, and you know what I mean? So you're not citing them for an infraction necessarily, you're citing them for a warrant,
I see.
if that makes sense.
It does. I'm just sort of curious to learn why. I was just looking as I go through here. What are things
number-
that changed? You know, what are things that changed between 2022 and 2023? And I
Right.
just saw a big change there.
And it is
Yeah.
striking that the total is the same in the 2 years.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, so that does, it would be interesting to see what the data, how they were reporting that data.
Yeah. Okay, next was on the ALPRs on page 20, slide 26. And packet page 139. So I just, more of a comment than a question, just for future reporting. I know this wasn't possible because our system was out of commission for such a large portion, but portion of the year. But I wanted to know for the future, when we're using the ALPR system to locate a stolen vehicle, I want to know how many cases did we have to look back pretty distant into the past? I know you mentioned one example of that, using the ALPR for an investigation going all the way back to 2022. So I'd be interested to know, and I'm hoping this is something you can track and bring back maybe at the mid-year report, or if that's not possible because we don't have enough data, then the next annual report. But how many crimes were solved that required us to have data going back 6 months on Cotati citizens?
As an investigatory tool, basically.
As an investigatory tool, yeah. Specifically going back more than a few weeks or more than a month. Because I fully understand those hits where, this is a stolen vehicle and it lights up on it alerts the officer and they're able to follow up right there. But we are doing a real trade-off between privacy when we're doing, the ALPR system, by virtue of the way it works, is doing kind of mass surveillance on the people in Cotati, like logging the license plate of any car that goes by within the field of view of the camera, and then storing their exact location data for 6 months. So that's a real trade-off. I mean, it's you can have an argument about how important that is, but it is a trade-off. And so I want to know what we're getting in exchange for that, like how many crimes are being solved by hanging on to all that data. So if that's something that's possible to track, it seems like the numbers, I'm seeing 12 vehicles recovered 1 year, 4 in another. It doesn't seem like it would be too onerous to dig into each one of those, since it's like single digits, and just see how that went down.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the last thing, I think the last one I had was, about the electric vehicles on page 32, slide 32, and packet page 145. We've had some public comment about the kind of neat looking paint job on these cars, where, what did Chief Parrish call stealth?
It's shadow print is what he.
Shadow print. Some folks love it because it looks cool. Other folks have complained that it's hard to tell that it's a police car, and if you're wanting to flag down a police car or just have like the visibility of the police in the neighborhood, they're not so visible with the stealth paint job on there. So I'm just wondering if there's been any internal discussions of the pros and cons of continuing as we convert more of our fleet to different kinds of paint jobs that we could have on here.
It's the first I've actually heard of it, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, just so you know.
Okay,
There's been
all right, no,
some
it's good, that's
discussion
good
about
to know
that in
that.
the
Yeah, that's
past.
good information.
Okay, and that was all of my questions. Yeah.
She just reminded me of one more, which is on page 8. I am assuming I know the answer to this, but I just don't want to assume. I want to ask you, which is these person crimes, that some of these, like, it wouldn't just be by incident, it would be by, so for example, someone, it could be aggravated assault and, I mean, or, you know, statutory rape and forcible fondling and forcible rape and, you know, like that all of those things could happen in one incident, or is each one an independent incident?
They usually default to, they could be, but they usually default to the highest crime. So in other words, if it was a homicide but someone was, you know, assaulted prior to being, to the homicide, it would be a homicide statistic.
Okay, so each one of these is an independent incident then?
Yes.
Okay. All right, thank you. I was presuming the opposite, that they would list all of the things that they were charged with in the arrest.
I think that would inflate the data quite a bit, especially when you're talking about assault, because I mean, obviously, there's no argument that any kind of forcible rape is obviously going to be some sort of assault, right? And it's not going to work that fit in there and that sort of thing. So I think they're trying to capture data that most looks at, you know, what, not necessarily the highest is the most, but the most applicable to what happened in that given incident.
Right, and I actually, I think that's a better way of doing it, because it gives us, I think it's a much sadder statistic that way, because it's like each one of these is individual, but thank you for clarifying that.
All right. I don't see any members of the public in the room, but let's see if we have any Zoom comment.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Sparks. Once again, speaking to our Zoom attendees, please use the raise hand icon to make a public comment. We do see your hand, Neil Hancock. You have the floor.
Yes, hello. Does the sound good this time?
We can hear you.
Just got a little better.
Yes.
Okay, good. Yes, thank you. Very much appreciate all the statistics and the view and the descriptions of the systems. I am a software engineer and work with databases, so I actually look at some of the issues where things go wrong. So I've got a couple of questions along that line, and I know there's been a lot of time passed under the bridge, but at one point computer scientists for social responsibility were outlining the problems that were occurring in national databases when numbers got entered and were wrong, and it took some time for those to really be cleared out. But I'm wondering, with the current system, and very much I do see a value in having some automated help in there, but with the automated system, the ALPERS, the automatic license plate reader, does that data stay within Cotati? That's the first question. And then the second question, are the officers given any, who are using it, and I know you said that they phone it back into, or they call back into the office to check on anything that comes up. They do a visual compare, but are they given any idea of how accurate the system is? So, you know, is the system 98% accurate? And of course, the license plates are at angles. You know, it's a really difficult problem at one level to be having looking for automatic data. And so then the third question also within there, do you keep track of any indication of, let's say, bad data, that you get an indication back that somebody's had a stolen car, or that the license plate shows up as a stolen vehicle, but then the person, when they're stopped and they go through all the papers, they appear to be in good order. So just three questions there, if that's some insights into that, if that's possible. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you for your comment.
That was the last hand on Zoom. Mayor Sparks, that will end public comment.
All right, thank you. Just going to some of those public concerns, I know that with the Vigilant system, the data did not stay within Cotati. It was shared through this proprietary system. Can you speak to whether Axon works the same way?
It works similarly, yes.
Yeah, so the data it's a commercial company, and the data can be shared with other jurisdictions.
Correct. And just to be clear, though, the data that they're pulling from is from the databases that law enforcement use from the state and nationally. So NCIC and through CLETS and those sorts of things. So it's not just its own ALPR data that just exists in its own Axon cloud necessarily, right? So like when someone gets an alert, like when an officer gets an alert about a stolen vehicle, that's a vehicle that's been entered in by a law enforcement professional who took a report regarding a stolen vehicle that was entered in what's called the SVS, the stolen vehicle system for the state, which then goes into that database, which then goes into NCIC. Axon, Vigilant, whoever pulls from that information, right? So it's the same information that if an officer was to check a license plate, forget about ALPR, forget about Axon, and was to run that plate through dispatch, and it comes back stolen, to be the same database and the same system. So it's relying on the same system that law enforcement would otherwise be using anyway. So, and those are the systems that give them probable cause. So they still have to go through that system anyway. So let's say if they got an alert from ALPR, they still are required to then go to dispatch, hey, run the plate, check it, just to make sure, double check it through that system, through the system the system they'd be using anyway, the database system through the state and through NCIC, and then getting a return back on that plate, which then gives them probable cause to make a stop on that if it's confirmed that it is still outstanding as, say, for example, a stolen vehicle. That makes sense.
And let me, sorry, just add a little onto that. At least this is my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but just to make sure, at least my understanding is that all the plates that we collect is in our cloud only. It's not shared generally. So just like the body cam footage, same thing. We'd have to get a lawful request to share that data with another agency. It's not just, doesn't just go out in some big database that any agency can use. And I believe that's correct, right?
So it's correct right now with the Axon.
Yeah,
That's right.
with
So
the
with
Axon, yeah.
Vigilant, it was shared throughout. The intent of the Axon is to share it, because otherwise it actually defeats the purpose of using it. So in other words, if anyone wanted to know if someone had been in Cotati, another law enforcement agency, and we kept it just in-house, then that would basically only be our information, I guess, to use.
But it's a lawful request. It's not just on the cloud somewhere.
Well, right, so it's actually both. So it's on the cloud.
Sorry, guys.
Yeah, sorry.
We're having a real-time discussion about it right here.
Yes, so our information is our information, right? So it's in our cloud. And the only entity that can access that information is a law enforcement person that has the credentials, that has the authorization, who's been authorized to do that, right? So if we are using, through Flock, really, so Axon partners with Flock, right, camera systems, right? And so that enables other law enforcement agencies to share whatever they're looking for, right? So in other words, if I was a Cotati investigator and I wanted to know about a certain plate, and I go into Axon and then I put that plate in there, that plate is going to show anywhere that it's been with Axon Flock potentially. If I put it, I would do like a date range and that sort of stuff, right? And if some other agency didn't share that data, it wouldn't show up in there. So I'd have to go to each individual and call them each time to try to kind of guesswork where that car might have been, rather than using that database to get that information, if that makes sense.
So if I can I clarify what I heard from you, and you tell me if this is right? That a person who has the right credentials, who's a member of another law enforcement agency, can access and find data about Cotati, locations of Cotati people through this system without calling us on the phone or sending us an email.
Correct. As it is right now, that's not the case. We've kept it in-house because we just got the Axon.
Okay, so right now they do have to call us or send an email.
That is true right now, but the intent of it is the same as it was with Vigilant.
So when you say the intent of it is the same, does that mean we have a plan to transition? And at what point will we be making that transition?
That was the plan, to transition back to the way that the database is shared with other law enforcement agencies, the way that other law enforcement agencies do share with them as well.
Okay.
Time-wise, it was probably the next few months, just making sure that our folks were familiar with the Axon. They went from Vigilant to Axon. There's really no difference necessarily, but just making sure that the way that they get data and the way that they're trained and everything like that, because it's a new system, that they're familiar with that.
Okay, I kind of want to go back to our initial discussions of this contract, because I do think we discussed whether or not we would intend to share it with other agencies at that time. And I'm not sure that this plan to share it was what we arrived on during that discussion or not. So we can go back and check on that later, I think. Yeah.
I just have a quick follow-up. So I heard you say, let me back up. So it's not just this Axum organization or like Vigilant. They're not like two separate proprietary databases of information that if you are credentialed, you can see it in either, correct? Or
No.
only one or the other?
It's one or the other depending on what you're using. They are their own vendor. So, but they will pull from similar databases, right? They will both pull, like a Vigilant system and an Axon system will alert to a stolen vehicle if that stolen vehicle is in the stolen vehicle system that is in NCIC, for example, pushing that information back out, right? So that's that. But if, for example, think of an investigatory function, right? If Axon has this information that's been put in into the ALPR, like the taking information on a daily basis of the plates and that sort of thing. If I don't have Axon and I have Vigilant, I may not have access to that information, even if the law enforcement agencies are sharing. They don't. A lot of them can't. They don't. Axon shares across Axon. For example, Santa Rosa PD has Axon, right? And so I could see what Axon Santa Rosa PD plates. It may potentially hit off those plates, if that makes sense, right? But if they had Vigilant, I wouldn't be able to necessarily do that. In fact, we had that when we had Vigilant and Santa Rosa has Axon. They weren't talking to each other.
Okay. My grandpa would say that's how they get you. You know, it's like if you're talking about this list of like where the car has been, right? And if you are not using the same database that they are, you don't get to see it. I think that's really defeats the purpose, right?
Yeah, no, it's a huge challenge.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Yes.
My understanding was that we identified only specific people in the department that could use this system. And there was also I don't want to say double, but you had to get an approval from someone, a supervisor or whatever. It isn't that willy-nilly anyone can go in there. And it was also my understanding that there were information left behind that says who went in and what they went in and looked for. So it's not like just anybody can go in, and also there's fingerprints that get left behind of who went after what information. Is that not true?
100%, yeah. So it has to be a credentialed officer that goes in. It's tagged as they have to have a need to know and a right to know when they go in for that information, and that's auditable. So that's audited. You can audit it.
And we don't give that to every single officer every single day. I thought when we talked about this, it was only there was a hierarchy that had to happen so that, again, we verified that need to have that information.
So it should be only the sworn officers that we have. Now I can
Okay.
check that.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Are there any other comments or discussion or questions for the chief? No? Okay, well, thank you so much. I'm sure I speak for everyone saying we really appreciate all the time and energy that went into this report. And thank you for answering all our numerous questions. All right, so we don't need any kind of vote or action there, right? Okay. So that takes us on to the city manager's report.
All right, thank you, Mayor, members of the council. So as you heard just a couple moments ago, the Cotati Police Department did assist Healdsburg following there was I'm sure you saw in the paper, there's a stabbing up there. So we used Ollie to help track a suspect, and that's just the latest in a long line of assists for other agencies. The DEA National Prescription Drug Take-Back Day will be Saturday, April 27th, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. It's at the community center, and that's for unwanted prescription medication. We also talked about that today, but that's coming up here pretty quickly. Women in Public Safety Day, the police department will be participating along with 20 plus other agencies in this on April 27th, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Again, same day, so it's a very busy day. That's in Santa Rosa at the Santa Rosa Fire Training Tower, which is 2126 West College Avenue. And you should be able to find information on all this on the police social media page. It's that time of year where we're assisting other cities with their parades, and Apple Blossom is the next one up, April, again, 27, 28, just to stay on that same weekend. For Public Works, Cypress Sewer and the Redwood and Cypress Drive paving projects are underway, as you guys have probably seen around town. We do expect significant paving work to start on Redwood Drive the week of May 6th, and then wrap up the following week. So on Redwood Drive, it's full depth reclamation. So that's the, like, dig it down to the road base and reconstruct. So it's very noticeable when they're doing it. And that is supposed to be the week of May 6th, I think, towards the end of the week. I think they're trying to do some of that work over the weekend to try to minimize business disruptions in the industrial area there. And Cypress Road is expected to be milled and paved the week of May 13th. And we'll be sending out Civic Plus alerts and on social media when those get closer. Just a reminder, we're working on the 2-post city entry signs. They are being fabricated. We expect them to be installed somewhere in early June at the entry points to the town. And the sidewalk gap closure project, well, you heard a public comment tonight. We did a meeting. We had a meeting last week, and it was well attended, and we very much appreciate all the public feedback at that. And we're currently taking those comments and concerns and summarizing them and modifying the plans as appropriate. They are going to be posted on the city's project page on our website, where additional comments can be provided. I think there's there'll be a additional comment period. I forget what that period is, but for people to comment on the website, on the project page. May 13th, just a reminder, capital project enterprise funds budget workshop here. So that's coming up. May 14th, the next night, we have, it's our normal council meeting, but we're going to be talking about the active transportation plan at that meeting. And then May 28th, we have a joint planning commission city council workshop a little earlier than our normal. That's a council meeting date, but a little bit earlier. So I believe it's 4:30 is when that's supposed to start. And that's on Plex Housing. And then for recreation, we had our first Spring Open Ranch Youth Day, and we had 31 people, and it was well attended and super fun for everyone. And then our next free Open Ranch Day will be on May 10th, and it's themed for Mother's Day, and that's 4 to 5:30 p.m. for families to attend. And drop-ins are permitted, but pre-registration is always encouraged to make sure we have enough supplies for everyone. This Saturday, April 27th, while all the other stuff's going on in the police department, we're also doing a backyard bird workshop at the Veranda Fletty Ranch from 1 to 3 p.m. And this is for children grades kindergarten to 5. And they can learn all about local birds and their habitats, how to identify them, and take a walk to see how they can find them. And then journaling and that sort of thing that goes along with that. This Saturday, also this Saturday is our annual community yard sale from 8 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. in the Katati Room behind City Hall. We're accepting donations on Wednesday, April 24th from 3 to 7 p.m. and then Thursday, April 25th from 10 to 6 p.m. So if anyone has anything they want to donate, those are the times. And it's not too late to sign up for multiple different summer camps. We have Camp Katati, day camp for 9 weeks this summer, 6 weeks of Sandy Loam Farm Camp, Spanish camp, and multiple children's theater camps. And then on May 11th from 9:30 a.m. to 12 p.m., Farmster will be hosting our second sheep shearing soiree, where you can watch the sheep get sheared, if that interests you. That's usually a big hit. It's free to attend. And then on May 16th, we have Bike to Work Day coming up in Sonoma County. We're partnering with Sonoma Clean Power to host an Energizer station 7:30 to 9:30 a.m. at the Smart Station on East Katati Avenue. And then on May 18th, we have our second Katati family camp out at the ranch. It's already sold out, but there's a wait list if somebody wants to attend. And then lastly, May 31st, we're going to have our first movies in the park for the year. And we'll be showing Shrek at Plaza Park once the sun goes down. It's free, of course, but you can bring your own picnic dinners or purchase snacks from a snack bar. Movies expected to start at 8:15, roughly sundown. And then anyway, I'll leave it there. We have a bunch of other stuff later in the summer, but I'll save that for another meeting. Thanks.
All right, great, thank you. Next, we're gonna move on to city council member reports. Sorry,
Could I
go
ask
ahead.
City
Questions?
Manager, a quick question on the Cypress repaving, and maybe this is for you, Craig Moore. The city board, I asked months ago, does that go to the city border? And got the answer yes, but then I realized later that's a more complicated question because the street is the border between the city and the county for a couple hundred yards there. So is it going right to the fork with Poplar, or is it going all the way down to where the Welcome to Cotati sign is? Do we know? And I don't need to know necessarily, but I'm worried when the county does their portion, if they only come up to the Welcome to Cotati line and we only come to the fork, then we're leaving a couple hundred meters in between that I hope we don't do.
Yeah, we're in conversations with County Public Works about that. Oh, okay. Yeah, so it's unresolved yet, but the project itself will go to the city limits of McKinnon is how it's currently.
City limits is unclear what that means. That's the point.
Yeah. Well, in terms of streets, it's like McKinnon Court, but the city limit is half of the street, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So are we just paving half the street?
No, the
Okay,
project
good.
paves the whole street. Yeah.
Okay.
But we're in discussions with County Public Works about, can we figure something better out?
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
A question? Yeah.
And you can tell me if this is not the right time to ask this. I wanted to ask about, for our Cotati Wi-Fi and a number to call when it's not working at like the Cotati room or wherever outside of regular business hours when we've like rented it out as a city. Is that something we have or could have, or like how do we manage that?
We don't, so for the Wi-Fi, like in the community center, we don't necessarily have 24-hour support for that, but you can contact the rec department and let them know, and then they can fix it the next, it's not after hours, evening type fixes, but we can look into it the next day.
Okay, so I wonder if that's something we could have, like just a phone number, because, these organizations are paying to use, or, renting. I've rented, they don't pay a lot, but they do pay to rent it and then are not able to, connect and do presentations or whatever it is their meetings we're planning to do because the internet is not working. So I wonder if that's something we could add or just look into.
I can look into it.
Okay, thank you.
All right, ready to, any more questions? All right, let's move on to council member reports. Do you have, maybe we'll start on this side and go that way?
Okay, so my main thing was actually very much related to what I just asked. On the 18th, I attended the Sonoma Mountain Rotary meeting as a council member, and delivered a presentation on the 2003 year in review, very similar to what you just did. The internet didn't work, so I wasn't able to actually really give the presentation, and there was no one to call. So that's why I was hoping that we could have that. So for other organizations, not us. And then so the 2x2x2, I got a cancellation notice, so I didn't attend that. And then I guess, again, this might not be the right time to bring this up, and if it's not, that's fine. We can do it another time. But I wonder if the questions that have been brought up could be addressed, like maybe clarify what the questions are and then have them answered, that Ms. Alderman has been asking. I'm not sure if that would be an agenda item or how we would do that, but it doesn't feel good that this idea that she is saying that it's been 6 months with no answer. I would like, and I don't know how we go about doing that, but I would like to see you know, it's publicly been asked, so I'd like, you know, some type of public answer, if we could.
I don't know if this is the appropriate time for that discussion.
No, we can't have a public
Yeah.
answer, but I'd be happy
Yeah.
to talk to you offline.
And I'm not asking for the answer right now. I'm just saying, I feel like if it's been asked publicly, then it would be nice to have an answer public. Not in this moment, just I want to bring it up because I don't know the proper format of doing that. I just would like to see it.
Member Rivers, I might suggest that just to move us along, that we had a process for setting agenda items to have a discussion offline with the city manager about any potential future agenda item you might wish to bring, and then work out among yourselves whether that's going to take significant staff time or not. This is just to reiterate our general process for bringing things to the council. So, and then if you wanted to bring something as a future agenda item, then that future agenda item portion of the meeting would be the time to do that.
Okay, so to clarify, asking for a question to be answered is an agenda item?
I may be misunderstanding. It sounded like you were asking for a discussion or an answer or something.
Yeah, I think it just starts with a conversation, so we'll start there.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
All right. Yes.
Nothing to report.
Okay. Let's just go left to right. I have nothing to report.
Okay. Oops. All right, I attended the Marin Sonoma Mosquito Vector Control, and they talked about their funding of their benefits, so we got a whole financial presentation on where they were at on that. Then I also attended the mayors and council members, which I think most attended that. So yes, you did have something to report.
I'm so sorry. I'll
That's
come
okay.
back. I forgot.
Okay. I'll let you report on that, but it's just a little tickler. The Waste Management Agency meeting was canceled because almost everyone was up at the Cal City's City Leaders Summit. There was some great sessions. In particular, one that the mayor might be interested in and had to do with homelessness and how they created a JPA in Solano. Might be something, rather than reinvent the wheel, they are more than happy to share their process and documents for how they did all that. So that was very interesting. There were also sessions on AI, which were how that's coming in and where we're going with that. And then our wonderful Vice Mayor Ford was very good in the very last closing session with the mastering your memory, and he is very good at doing that. So we learned some techniques for that, but there were some other sessions. We had a great rally the morning that we got there over there on the Business Roundtable initiative. And what was so wonderful about the rally was that the breadth of people, from nurses and firefighters and school teachers and just all kinds of folks expressing how it would be bad if that passes. And so they'll be working on that, but that was a very, very interesting. And I have notes if you want more information on that. And I believe that's all I have. And unfortunately, I was at the meeting for mosquito vector control, and I got put on a subcommittee. And I was also put on a groundwater subcommittee, so I'm working on those two. That's all I have.
Councilmember Lee?
So yes, everything that Councilmember Harvey said, it was a really good conference that we went to last week at Cal Cities. In addition, there was a really good conversation on redistricting in AB 764, and they really talked about some new laws taking effect and some very specific timelines tied to election dates. There's a San Francisco Chronicle has a 3-part series on California Voters' Right Act and redistricting, and the Secretary of State is developing an outreach template for redistricting. So overall, it was a really great conference. I enjoyed every part of it. I also went to, the counties were there, CSAC was there as well. So we had a counties and cities mixer, I also went to the Latino caucus and the African American caucus mixers. And it was just a great event that we spent there, just learning a lot about so many different things and a lot of legislation and updates on the priorities that Cal Cities has. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And I'm so sorry. I forgot, since most of you were there, I forgot to report about it. But we did have a Mayors and Council Members Association that Katati hosted, and I've heard that our deputy city clerk did a huge amount of work preparing for that event, which went off beautifully without a hitch. So big kudos there. And we had our Board of Supervisors representative David Rabbit came and spoke to the group, and I think it was a very successful event. We also heard from the library in the smaller group of just the mayor's board at the beginning. We heard from the library director, but it was largely the same presentation that we had tonight, except she focused it more on Katati tonight. So you've all heard what I heard now. So I don't think I have anything else to report. Yeah.
I realize I forgot to mention tomorrow is Coffee with Kay. So 6 to 8, Redwood Cafe, come have some potato skins and tell me what's good and what you'd like us to look at. Thanks.
All right, thank you. So now we're going to open it up to public comment on non-action agenda items. Do we have any Zoom attendees remaining?
We do. Thank you, Mayor Sparks. Speaking to our Zoom attendees, please use the raise hand icon to make a public comment. Mayor Sparks, that'll end public comment.
Okay, thank you so much. We are going to go into closed session. We'll have a conference with legal counsel on existing litigation. Let's open up the public comment one more time in case anyone would like to make public comment on the closed session.
Thank you. Speaking once again to our Zoom attendees, please use the raise hand icon to make a public comment on the closed session item. And Mayor Sparks, that'll end public comment.
All right, thank you very much. And let's take a brief 5 to 10 minute break. And once everyone's ready, we'll reconvene for closed session. received after the agenda was posted?
Yes, Mayor Sparks, there were 2 public comments received. One, a citizen's business public comment, the other, a public comment on item, I believe it was 10B on the consent calendar. Those were all posted to the web agenda and available here in print in the chamber tonight.
Thank you very much. With that, the meeting is adjourned.